urgency is injected. We arrive at humanity's oldest, most successful colony, and find it in the process of being decimated. Nihilus sods off immediately, so much for evaluating us, leaving Commander Shepard, Kaidan Alenko, and a fella named Jenkins, the Mass Effect trilogy's greatest he's dead, to fight through the invading force and secure the beacon. I don't think Medigel's gonna help here, mate. As we find ourselves battling drones, we're soaking in the atmosphere of Eden Prime. I actually think in the remaster this took a hit. In the original version, the sky was a deep red hue. It represented just how desperately wrong things were. Now it just kind of looks like a bog-standard summer's evening. Nevertheless, the sound design and the layering of encounters from Geth drones to actual Geth, who don't typically leave their portion of space, contributes to the building mystery. Why are they attacking a human colony? It's obvious that whatever purpose this attack serves, it's greater than just Eden Prime. Much like our mission here is about so much more than just the colony. The mystery of this attack is drip-fed to us through dialogue conversations. Firstly, through Ashley Williams, Jenkins' replacement, and then after fighting past zombified people, we bump into a couple of scientists hiding in a cabin, one of whom appears to be having an existential crisis on behalf of the entirety of humanity. The scientists tell us about a Turian among the Geth. It can't have been Nihilus because he was with us when the attack started. Then, shortly after, we get momentarily removed from Shepard's perspective. Nihilus recognizes the Turian, though he doesn't realize the threat he poses. He calls him Saren, and in the realm of villain design, Saren's really cool. He has a menacing, intimidating presence exemplified by the music that plays whenever he's on screen. The Turian trademark flange in his voice gives his words volume.
I wasn't expecting to find the Geth here. The situation's bad.
Don't worry. I've got it under control.
Nevertheless, from this image you can tell he's different from other Turians. The contrast between Nihilus's aesthetic and his is potent. Saren's look is paler. He has cybernetic implants all over his body, and this gives him distinction from Turians, which is important. He's more than just an example of a Turian. That sounds like an inefficient waste of words, and the inefficient part at least might be true, but a big theme of Mass Effect 1 is space racism. Aliens have prejudices against humans and vice versa. Him being an alien antagonist is a bit on the nose, thematically pulling in a negative direction. We're shown this scene so Saren can be distinguished from what his species actually look like, to point out that he is unique. The importance of that, of course, is there's more to him than just being a continuation of complex human-Turian relations as already outlined. There's no better way to demonstrate Saren is serving a different end than watching him murder his kinsman in cold blood. That being said, it's too early in the plot to discern what his motivations actually are, but I'd wager it has something to do with that Goliath of a ship that we can see taking off as we approach the landing where Nihilus's corpse can be found. And what a little detail that is. The ship that looks a bit like a crayfish, despite obviously being miles away, still looks gigantic, dwarfing any towers nearby, letting off a dark red smoke as it rises to the heavens. How does a thing like that even get off the ground? For a game released in 2007 contending with all kinds of technical limitations, Mass Effect has an immense portrayal of scale. The emphasis on the big ship most certainly means it'll be relevant later, but for now we have bigger issues. Nihilus is dead, and a witness to his murder tells us about Saren, which is fair enough. If you're going to do a mystery, deviating from the primary perspective is risky. So, bringing it back in line with the primary perspective by informing the main protagonist about an event the observer witnesses that doesn't involve them is a great way to ensure we aren't armed with knowledge that Shepard doesn't have. In this context, nothing would annoy me more than knowing more than the characters do. I mean, I can't avoid that at this point, it's my nth playthrough, but in spirit, if the viewer, player, observer, depending on the form of media we're talking about, is to be privy to information the main protagonist and other protagonists don't possess, that can't be the case for long. That's important, it's a demonstration of narrative focus. and that is the contribution of the dock worker who may or may not be a smuggler. From this point, all we have to do is fight through some more Geth and try and catch up with Big Saz, while simultaneously preventing the Geth from blowing up the area around the beacon itself. In succeeding, Shepard interacts with the beacon. It gives him strange, indecipherable visions before exploding and knocking him out, waking up on the Normandy sometime later to make sense of the whole thing. The visions play back into the Prothean mystery. Saren obviously has an interest in that too. The Geth venturing beyond the Veil was unprecedented, never mind to attack a human colony, and that massive ship all leave burning questions. As for the death of Jenkins and Nihilus and the destruction of the Prothean beacon, it's fair to say the mission appears to have failed. A kick to the teeth of the plucky humans. It's unlikely the Council will want to appoint a bottle job to the Spectres, and that means humanity's progress in deepening positive relations has halted, and that is no doubt a problem we are going to have to resolve. As for Saren, Anderson fills us in on who he is. One of the best Spectres the Council has. It's going to be very difficult for a human's words to sway their opinion on him, especially when a lot of aliens think humanity is growing too fast. The only evidence we have against the guy is the fact that Shepard had a vision, and the hearsay of a dock worker, of course. In short, we've got our bloody work cut out for us. Nonetheless, we make for the Citadel, which is where the game won me over. The Normandy's arrival at the Citadel for the first time is where this game goes from interesting to utterly enthralling. Situated in a cloud of pink known as the Serpent Nebula sits a giant space station. So massive, in fact, that it's not just a space station, it's a megacity. The capital of Citadel Space, the seat of the Council. It is a visual feast. The crew look on in amazement along with the player at the sheer scale of the thing and the mass of ships that surround it. It's a mesmerizing detachment from the fringe of civilization. Now we're at its beating heart. For there to be a great galaxy, there needs to be an equally great core. The Citadel functions as the Mass Effect universe's core, a layered space station city where the world building is at its most potent, also serving as something the player cannot see in the real world. After all, that is the base essence of sci-fi, and fantasy while we're at it. Eden Prime is very Earth-like, it doesn't convey this same feeling, and being on a spaceship is like being indoors. It's fancy, but again, the Citadel is the first fundamentally impressive sight Mass Effect 1, and by extension the Mass Effect universe, throws at us. Before we were dealing with mostly humans, one Turian, another Turian, and a bunch of robots. Now we're in a cultural melting pot of various species, and provided the player meets the game halfway, it's more than willing to go out of its own way to ensure we understand that each species is unique, beholden to their own cultures and customs, mannerisms and sensibilities. The idea of exploring the Citadel presents an inherent wealth of possibility. This is a civilization that transcends humanity. It's a touch anthropomorphic overall, which can be forgiven given the entire consumer base of this game is human, unless you've been teaching your dog how to game, in which case I salute you. The Citadel is a wonder because it's a well-oiled machine. As much as it's aesthetically pleasant, it's rendered believable through the complexity of its function. So while our arrival here is a moment of genuine, gobsmacking impact, once that novelty fades, we need to feel as if it's just another Tuesday. Fortunately, nothing screams Tuesday quite like bureaucracy. Remember, we were on a mission partially on behalf of the Council to secure the Prothean beacon that exploded, and the Turian Spectre that came with us is dead. Commander Shepard is the natural scapegoat, and that falls in line with the status quo of the galaxy. We have no evidence against Saren, whose hatred for humans is palpable, and the Council have no grounds aside from human accusations to suspect their top agent of any wrongdoing. Only the testimony of a traumatized dock worker. Anderson's personal history with Saren also doesn't help, but long story short, we've raced here with urgent news and all we're getting in return is governmental inefficiency. In order to go and stop Saren, we first need to find evidence against him. There's a great commentary at play here. Politics can push pressing matters down the priority list. We know for a fact Saren is up to dodgy stuff. We have our man, but understandably before we can have a crack at him, we need to demonstrate to the powers that be that we need to. This is important on two counts. Firstly, that is kind of how it works in general, and secondly, because there's a massive power imbalance between Commander Shepard, a human soldier, and Saren, a Turian, the Spectre's top agent, the Council's right hand. Unless the evidence against him is irrefutable, it's far too inconvenient to entertain the idea that he's gone rogue. In short, why would they believe us over him? And since so far all the harm he's done has been to a human colony on Eden Prime, considering the already clearly outlined broader galactic temperature towards humanity, that within itself may very well be something the Council is willing to overlook. Humans have their own ideas, they aren't always willing to play ball and cooperate. They're viewed as an aggressive expansionist bully, and they're known for looking out for their own first. They haven't entirely acclimatized to being part of something greater yet. What makes that so interesting is that perception is not entirely false. It is not unreasonable for the alien species to be cautious of humanity's brashness. It isn't exactly meant to feel fair, but it is not as unfair as it seems either. That's another area where Mass Effect stands out to me. Like I said earlier, humans are finding their place in the galaxy. Nobody's gonna hand it to them. They've got to find what they can offer that the Citadel races cannot. The Asari bring diplomacy, the Turians bring a massive military force, and the Solarians bring intelligence and science. With those critical areas covered, there's little to offer, and I don't think Jesus is going to cut it. Saren becomes both an obstacle and objective. If our personified stand-in for the entire human race in Commander Shepard wants to prove the value of an entire species, this is our opportunity. So off we trot to do that, but naturally we can't do it alone. We need to pick up some allies, though the game doesn't necessarily frame it that way explicitly, and once again the Citadel proves itself to be a stunning backdrop. The beating heart of galactic society reflects the rest of it. There's a flavour and a friend for everyone here, and Mass Effect doesn't homogenize its race's perspectives into hive-minded cultures, though doing so can be very seductive and an easy trap to fall into. Saren's disdain for humanity might be palpable, but despite the checkered history, not all Turians share his views. Some are indifferent towards us for other reasons, but take Garrus Vakarian for instance, a Turian hell-bent on the idea that Saren is the bad guy. He was the C-Sec officer in charge of the investigation into Saren, and is committed to getting his man. He doesn't mindlessly believe the humans are wrong and Saren is right, quite the opposite. Considering we meet him before our first interaction with the Council, it establishes a precedent early that, even though aliens look different to humans, they're all individuals. In Garrus's case, it scores us an easy ally. There's also the Krogan mercenary, Rex, or as I like to call him, the angriest tortoise I've ever seen. He wants us to help him out with his contract, which just so happens to be in the direction we're going to be going anyway, in our own investigations into Saren, and he commits to join us thereafter for the challenge. The best way I can explain why that's the case is because the Krogan are culturally Millwall supporters. They love a scrap. His main reason for joining, of course, is because the plot needs him to, and if he wasn't such a fascinating character, that would be a problem. So together with my new alien friends, we take on Fist, the proprietor of Cora's Den, who tells us where we can find a Quarian who has found evidence against Saren. So we find her, and would you look at that? Evidence. She explains that she's on a pilgrimage and found a recording of Saren on the memory core of a Geth.
Eden Prime was a major victory. The beacon has brought us one step closer to finding the conduit.
And one step closer to the return of the Reapers.
So, thanks to Tali's diligence, our ragtag crew gains another member. All of the new recruits are alien, and there's a point in there. The narrative might be deeply embedded in the idea of human exceptionalism, but there's also an air of cooperation and collaboration. Standing alone is not as fun as having allies. That's important because Mass Effect is pushing this commentary in both directions. Humanity are proving their worth to the galaxy, but at the same time, there's an emphasis on improving adaptability, working together with the other races. After all, the very human us-against-the-world mentality might score us some colonies and greatly simplify things, but it won't endear us to our extraterrestrial peers. This story is about earning our place, but that journey is just as much introspective as it is based on action. So the Citadel, as a sample of what we're becoming a part of, has to function as a motivating factor in that mission. The newfound friends we make are just the tip of the iceberg of the vibes we get from the place. We're trawling through the Citadel, the Presidium and wards to find evidence against Saren, but we're also building a deeper connection with the Mass Effect universe. It isn't a place that innately hates us or makes us feel unwelcome, quite the opposite. There are a whole range of views of humans here. For everyone who harbours bitterness towards us, there's somebody welcoming, willing to tell us more about them, their species, their cultures. One way or another, we can find out the information our curiosity pushes us towards. An early favourite of mine were the Elcor, a species of massive, slow, heavy beasts who communicate through ways so subtle that in order to speak with anyone who is not of their kind, they have to declare their tone before monotonously continuing. That way, their meaning can be more elaborately understood. What a marvellous concept for an autism creature. Furthermore, our exploration not only rewards us with understanding more about the species we can meet, but understanding their place in the galactic hierarchy. Not every race here is represented on the Council. Some just have embassies and aren't viewed as capable enough to become full-fledged Council races. For instance, the Volus. Nobody knows what a Volus actually looks like. All we know is they're built like space hoppers and have to wear high-pressure suits, otherwise they might decompress and presumably die. As for the Hanar, they are basically jellyfish. There's such an evolutionary vastness to Mass Effect's alien races that it's only natural any form of political union between them results in a less than equal political structure. Humans aren't the only ones who want a greater say here. They're the newest species to Citadel space, yet from the perspective of the Council they're more physiologically conventional. So while the Council does not see them as an equal yet, they are simultaneously being granted favour over the likes of the Volus, the Elcor, the Hanar, whom the Council clearly view legally as a lesser species. Avina, the Presidium VI Guide, is a great betrayal of those biases. We aren't the only targets of the Council's condescension. We are simply the most likely to defy it, creating social waves both above and below us. Our experiences on the Citadel can really delve into that complexity. We aren't special merely because we aren't being granted the equality that comes with a seat on the Council. We're special because we're new and haven't got a clear role in this hierarchy at all yet. Every other species, both Council and otherwise, from a general perspective, occupy a contributing function. The Asari are the diplomats and mediators, the very glue of discussion in the political structure. The Solarians prioritize intelligence and research, and the Turians are the military power. Humans discovered that in the First Contact War. Away from the Council races, the Volus function as the financiers and traders. The Elcor are slow and deliberate. Every action is conservatively considered, and that makes them unrivaled in planning. As with the Hanar, not to be confused with diplomacy, they're really good at fostering relationships. They are deeply enigmatic, yet very polite. Being an aquatic species, they're also great navigators of marine environments. Every Citadel race brings something to the table, while also having areas they rely on the others for. That is where it's apparent humanity stands out. Humanity's natural tendency to distrust outsiders means they're adept and self-sufficient in most areas, especially those that matter. This is because the other societies we observe snippets of have rigid structure that help box individual members of that race into the role that best suits the Council. The Turians being a military species means every Turian is a soldier. They will always have a more powerful military than humans. As far as the big picture is concerned, there's always somebody on the galactic scene who can outclass us. Our advantage is more microscopic. The individual. The best human soldier would have an advantage over the best Turian soldier, and the only reason for that is because the human soldier has a greater likelihood of actually wanting to be there. There's no mandate that necessitates every human serve. The ass-kicking element might still go either way, but the point is there's a malleability and adaptability to humans that within itself is unrivaled. Provided the individual has the desire, grit and dedication to do it, they can excel not because they were predetermined to, but because they chose that path. So as a species, we'll never be superior to the Asari, the Turians, the Solarians in their specialised areas, but the base will be covered with expertise at the individual level. That malleability makes us hard to put into a box, hard to determine, hard to quantify, rendering us a worthwhile ally, yet unpredictable. So the Council keeps us close enough because too much distance is dangerous, and also at arm's length to keep that ambition in check.
because the Council races are learning that humans pursue what they want and don't easily give up. And that's ultimately the distinction between humans and the non-Council races. The others have been around for a bit, they've slotted into roles. They are waiting with varying degrees of patience for an artificial ascension to prominence, while the new kids are actively pursuing it. To cut a long story short, the arrival of the Homo sapiens has completely reshuffled the accepted norm of galactic politics. The Citadel exists to put us in close quarters with said politics, while also showcasing a slice of galactic life that ensures the alien species introduced never necessarily come across impotent, and furthermore were provided with plenty of opportunity to understand that while their individualism might not exist to the extremes of our own, they are still people with a tapestry of perspectives. Which wasn't entirely necessary since that was outlined before we even arrived here by Nihilus, but that's a crucial part of world building, feeding you an idea and letting you see it. There are many ideas touched down upon before landing on Eden Prime that the Citadel comes to reinforce. The Council race's perspective, or broader alien general consensus, and the point of view of us, the pesky humans, not to mention the work both parties have to do to meet halfway somewhere. The Citadel is there to show us this isn't a hostile stalemate. As such, while navigating this slice of a galaxy that doesn't know what to do with us, we can still feel warmly welcome and soak in its magnificence. That in turn renders it motivating for the player. It encourages us to want to find our place, to prove our capability, our reliability, to demonstrate our value. It wants us to feel like we could be at home here, and the place feels increasingly authentic through the complex layering of lore. If we miss key details, we can always fall back on the magnificent, mostly voiced codex. We can be educated on our peers and events in the galaxy, with entries that come thick and fast, particularly when on the Citadel. We can push on and do only the story content here, or we can take our time and get stuck into activities aiding people, both human and non-human, in their troubles, under the premise that with every action we learn something new, discovering yet more texture. Rapidly sodding off to save the galaxy feels like it does a disservice to just how impressively meticulous this fictional universe is. The short time frame within which it establishes so many ideas is only part of the equation though, so let's take a minute to talk about design. Mass Effect 1 is originally a 2007 game, remaster or not. The bulk of the experience was built around 2007 limitations. The Citadel is built in such a way that it has to represent something much bigger than it can actually be as a playable space, so it has to be conservative with just how much area it dedicates to everything it wants us to be able to explore. The Citadel Tower is a small area that represents the seat of government. This is where the Council meet. It's a grand room and you can figure there are various areas around it that we can't actually access. While we're dealing with the representatives of the Council in there, you can fathom there are entire wings full of staff supporting this hierarchy. After all, it's hard to imagine that one individual could accurately represent an entire species on their own, but its greatest value is its layout is foreshadowing. As for the Presidium, this is where things get more interesting. It's a compact space again, dotted mostly with huddles of NPCs, but its true benefit comes from looking up, where it's made distinctly clear we aren't on a planet. There's a nice artificial sky and we can witness sky cars curving up around the ring, the very centre of the Citadel as seen from the Normandy. It's clean and bright and makes sense that it's the space station's prime real estate. It has water and foliage to beautify it further. It's clear this is where the dignitaries pass through on their visits to the Citadel. It's airy and pleasant, and the people we meet here are generally speaking of the elite. Then, a short couple elevator rides away, we have the wards, that by relation to the Presidium feels like it's the interior of a large building, much like the other large buildings you can see on the wings of the Citadel out the window. The views allow us to picture that the population density here must rival Earth's most densely populated cities, so we get to see a lot of it while only being able to explore a minuscule chunk. A chunk that consists of a market, a bar, a casino, a police station and a medical clinic. Life here is more varied and less sanitized. What goes on here depends more on who we're dealing with to
to a greater degree considering anyone can access it. The grit does not translate the best, it pales in comparison to Mass Effect 2's take on grit, but it certainly isn't as airy as the Presidium and feels more like we're on a space station where people happen to live. It has an almost Star Warsy finish, no doubt in part due to BioWare's KOTOR pedigree, where it bears a fantastical facade, full of cracks for the highly flawed world to seep through. Then there's the rich synthy score. The fantastic music that dominates the audioscape helps top off the atmosphere. Even this area's disguised loading screens contribute. For instance, the lifts. Either your squad mates will have a conversation, or you'll overhear a news report. It can reference things you've done personally, reference events that happened a while back, events that are occurring elsewhere in the galaxy, or simply function as a method through which the game tells a joke. Even the rapid transit loading screens give us something to look at. There is an abundantly clear, conscious effort to ensure the immersion is not broken even for a second. I wouldn't go so far as to say it has a 100% success rate. There are certain lapses in logic, like supposedly the Citadel has a very high population density, yet there are certain spaces that do seem wasted. For instance, this corridor with nothing in it. Surely just put some dud doors on one side that tell us they lead somewhere, just know where we need to go. And then there's the inexplicable cube in C-Sec. I gather it's cut content, maybe even an augmented reality training arena, but it's just a cube. It's never really addressed why this cube sits in Citadel traffic control. It's just kind of there. Fortunately though, the vast majority of the time the Citadel functions as a very tight environment. But I'm sure you're just about fed up with me talking about it at this stage, but it is such a massive part of Mass Effect 1 that it justified such a tangent. Of course, with the evidence gathered that Saren is a naughty boy, the Council are happy to expel him from the Spectres and seem curious about these Reapers he's hankering for the return of. Early, we understand they are supposedly an ancient race of sentient machines that disappeared around the time of the Protheans, and that's more sinister and interesting than Saren being bad simply because he's a rotten guy, as Anderson makes it seem. We may have successfully investigated Saren, but there's more that needs to be done. His ally, Matriarch Benezia, as heard in the audio recording, and of course these mysterious Reapers that are supposedly returning. What are they? And how will they supposedly wipe out all life in the galaxy? What's clear is somebody needs to go after Saren and get to the bottom of this, and sending a fleet into the Terminus systems would no doubt start a war. But what about a Spectre? After all, there is a vacancy. So with a bit of convincing, the Council make Commander Shepard the first human Spectre. A great honour for humanity, and what we've been after. Before we're released on the galaxy to bring Saren to his knees, we have already made history within the Mass Effect universe. This can feel a tad unearned, as all we've done is crack a few skulls in the wards and track down a marginalised alien who'd already done the hard bit. And I won't defend that as much as point out the consolation is the old stakes are making way for new ones that are much, much higher. Because Saren is looking to bring back a race of ancient sentient machines with the mandate of routinely destroying organic life. The opportunity of becoming a Spectre may be realised, but now there's every chance we've got to prove humanity can be a superpower by saving the galaxy. So Captain Anderson cedes command over the Normandy to us, and we're finally released upon the galaxy, with our good old Normandy crew and newfound alien entourage. Now we take to the skies and hopefully remember there's a main story at some point. Okay, you're probably thinking, what are you on about? It is an objective truth that Mass Effect 1's story is not a long experience, and from a certain point of view, the gameplay and side content does leave a lot to be desired. While there are highly common gripes with both the gameplay and side content that I view as absolutely valid, I also think there's something to be said for the substance of what's going on to still diligently be serving purpose. First and foremost, let's get the recruitment of Liara out the way so we have a complete squad. We go to the planet Therum and recruit an Asari archaeologist specialising in the Protheans named Liara Tassoni, the daughter of Matriarch Benezia. I never promised that within itself would be especially thought-provoking. We contend with some Geth forces and hoof it out of there with the Asari in tow, bringing down ancient Prothean ruins in the process. You know, just casually demolishing an ancient structure so old It makes Stonehenge look like temporary scaffolding. With that done, we now have the full set. The two humans, Kaidan and Ashley, Tali, Garrus, Rex, and Liara. And if you think learning about these races ends with the Citadel, wrong. Our alien squad mates are the best windows into these alien cultures that we're going to get. Furthermore, they are 75% fascinating characters in their own right. It's important too, over the course of the main story and all the side content, that you take the time to explore the hub area of the Normandy and socialise with your squad members. It's in doing this that we will learn more about them, and that is perhaps most important with the likes of Tali and Rex, the Quarian and the Krogan, the two species we don't see an awful lot of on the Citadel. The reason for this is because they are the most generally stigmatized species. The Krogan for the Krogan rebellions, which ended with a genetically engineered virus infecting all Krogan that renders their birth rates incredibly low. They are practically walking tanks and typically demonstrate the aggression to match it, so for most Krogan we meet, we promptly shoot them in the face. But there's more to learn about them than just that, and Rex is the only one willing to tell us anything. Most notably, the Krogan are the victims of a council-sanctioned genocide, and the future of their species, as a result, is so doomed. Many of them turn their back on their homeworld and ply their trade the best way they know how, as warriors, mercenaries for hire. Having no greater good to aspire to, they are cynical. They'll fight for whoever's paying best, transforming the broader stigma around the Krogan into a self-fulfilling prophecy. Rex might possess that very gruff, intimidating, battle-hardened exterior, and a personality forged from centuries of cynicism, yet somewhere under that tough, terrifying shell is a highly intelligent individual who displays signs of having a moral code. Considering how nihilistic the existence of a Krogan must be at this point, that's a fantastic platform for character development. What impression can we make on this jaded mercenary? As for Tali, the most telling interaction is through Engineer Adams, who notes that she is impressively inquisitive, so she's a likeable sort who makes a positive impression on the crew, but the Quarians too are stigmatized in Citadel space. They're a nomadic people, they don't have a homeworld anymore. They lost that homeworld when their AI creations, the Geth, rebelled. Since then, artificial intelligence became illegal in Citadel space. No doubt the two events are connected. So the Quarians are the ultimate reason the Geth exist, which isn't going to make people view them positively. And on top of that, they are migrants with no fixed home. We learn through Tali that she's young, on her pilgrimage, a rite of passage into adulthood, where a Quarian strikes out on their own to explore and understand the galaxy better, bringing something of value back to the migrant fleet as a gift to the captain of the ship they then join. We also learn the reason why she wears a suit at all times, because the Quarians have spent so much time aboard sanitized ships. Their immune systems have paid the price over the centuries, so while Tali can breathe without the mask, the chances that she would become infected with something are very high. This also creates a slight air of mystery around Tali, as we cannot properly see her face. We can discern the odd detail, but otherwise her visor shrouds it. While we're at it, I'm quite certain she's the only Quarian we can actually meet at all in Mass Effect 1, meaning every detail we can learn about the Quarians in this game comes from her, so it's amazing how fleshed out our understanding of them can become from her alone. Garrus's dynamic is less about his species. He's a Turian, so we can learn plenty about Turians without consulting him directly. All of our dialogue around Garrus is tailored towards tapping into his history as a cop, and how so far that's formed his bespoke personality. From this we can discern his reasons for quitting C-Sec and joining us on a cruise across the galaxy to slap up his kinsman, and that's an opportunity for Commander Shepard to influence him. More than an example of a Turian to probe for knowledge, his role in relation to Commander Shepard is that of a protege. There's no doubt he's a competent if not highly skilled soldier, but he's swept up in the idea of the mission. It's up to us to either stoke that fire or rein him in. His morality is heavily influenced by Shepard's own. After all, the morality system this game has is heavily decided by the dialogue. So that means if you're playing a renegade Shepard, making renegade choices in dialogue will contribute towards building that renegade graph, meaning you unlock pivotal renegade skill checks encouraging you to enable Garrus's renegade proclivities. Whereas if you're playing Paragon for much the same reason, you're going to work to disarm them. So Garrus in a virtually binary way can be heavily influenced by the player's own choices. Beyond that, in later entries he slots into a best pal role, which makes him an incredibly fun squad mate to roll with, but Mass Effect 1 is more about the foundation of the character. Glimmers of later Garrus do shine through, but his evolution into possibly one of the best characters in the franchise doesn't start to see yield until Mass Effect 2. That's not to say he's not interesting here, it's quite the opposite. Teaching this hot-headed cop about the impact of decisions and the consequences of one's actions, or inversely nurturing his ruthless streak, is a long-term investment moulding him into Commander Shepard's ultimate wingman. We get to bond with him in phases, and Mass Effect 1 is simply the first phase. Now, there is value in Liara, but again, she functions almost similarly to Garrus, except she doesn't have as interesting a lived experience so far. She's a socially awkward archaeologist, whose development in the first game is pretty flat, and then in Mass Effect 2, she's just a different character. This Liara we see before us doesn't bloom, she just becomes somebody else altogether, it's insane. Her function is to primarily help Shepard unravel his visions by using some Asari mind-melding technique, and binding her understanding of the Protheans to what Shepard saw when interacting with the beacon. I wish I could say that felt as helpful as it was intended to come across. She is somewhat insightful into the workings of the monogender Asari, but otherwise I can't help but feel, considering how flirtatious Shepard's dialogue with Liara is, her other chief function is the romance contest for Ashley, or indeed Kaidan. And, being an alien, she often comes out on top, and the odd bit of Asari lore we can pluck from her is just secondary, as is the fact we're on a mission to kill her mum. But despite her general dullness, she has two things going for her. If you seek her out for conversation, she does contribute to the world building. Second, tentacles. Apparently that's enough for some people. Liara fortunately gets much more interesting as a character in the sequels too, but here she's one of the steadier squad mates. There isn't a lot to build with her. Perhaps more than anything to do with Liara herself, it's most apparent in these conversations that Mass Effect 1's dialogue can be a bit funny. It is a 2007 game. Dialogue can be an information exchange at times, so the game doesn't exactly bid to explore how far it can push the dialogue. Maybe try and incorporate characteristics you'd expect from real conversations, which tend to flow entirely differently to dramatized ones. So maybe Liara's issue isn't her characterization, but the fact the bottle that characterization is in doesn't really get uncorked. While Garrus's mentality is explored and Rex's cynicism is unraveled, not to mention Tali's journey of finding her own place within the Quarian sphere, Liara has perhaps the greatest emotional motivator. She's just a bit too steady for that to feel genuine. Then there are the human characters whom are easiest to dismiss. Kaidan dealt with his baggage a long time ago. As a result, he doesn't really have an arc, he's just a steadfast operative. He has interesting backstory, there's no denying that. So, like the other characters, he does contribute to the world building, but there's very little for us to do with it. He's a likeable and reserved member of the team, but when it comes to a dilemma faced later in the plot, this guy's too easy to hand the short end of the stick. Then there's Ashley, dubbed the Space Racist. She isn't very trusting of our new alien companions, and takes a particular disliking to Liara to both reinforce this and force a love triangle dilemma if you're playing as male Shepard. But that deep character flaw is an interesting trait to explore, because it hasn't manifested from nowhere, and while the game spends plenty of time fixating on alien attitudes towards humans, it also doesn't neglect the reverse fixture. Humans have xenophobic attitudes too, and Ashley's doesn't manifest in any way that would be malicious, it's merely passing distrust. Her grandfather fought in the First Contact War, becoming notorious for being the only general to surrender to the Turians, and her career prospects as a result are pretty limited. She has a legacy not to live up to, but to overrule. Sympathizing with the likes of the Turians now is a concept she perceives to have dire consequences, since giving quarter to the aliens has tarnished her family name's reputation. The idea that humanity comes first has simply been extra drilled into her. Now she struggles to fathom that there might be another way. coming to view any alien as an ally is simply alien, and she makes her concerns known. What this means is Ashley does have a foreseeable arc. Whether or not Mass Effect 2 and 3 did to realise it is a different question. The reason I've allocated 10 minutes to talking about the squad is because this is the first base for peripheral content. We don't need to get to know our crew, but we choose to. Every exchange almost yields value. We learn yet more about the galaxy we're a part of. That being said, were you to say that Mass Effect 1's character work would be excelled by its successor, I agree with you. When it comes to this stuff, Mass Effect 2 is just different gravy. But it's less of a learning experience there, while here it very much so is. And that extends way beyond the characters themselves here. Another key aspect to Mass Effect's amazing world building happens to be the exploration. It is not an especially renowned area, but I believe it's an area that's often overlooked on account of the game's very obvious technical limitations. How you find the content of Mass Effect is quite straightforward. In simple speak, you use the galaxy map to jump between star systems and have a nosy. Every world in a system can be explored to some extent, even if it's just a wall of text feeding us information. As such, we can find various human colonies and fact files on a variety of other worlds. That makes inspecting each and every one of them an opportunity to learn something new. So even when removed from galactic hubs and not engaging with characters necessarily, every world we can see contributes to the lore one way or another. Some descriptions might cling to the simple facts, but others will provide us with far more thought-out mini-stories, sometimes tapping into humorous avenues, other times seeking to fascinate the player with passing mysteries. I don't know if that's just me, but it's a far more effective method for highlighting just how big space really is, to not be able to land on every rocky planet we see. Some are just there for decoration, and the game meets us halfway on our curiosity. And to break that down, every so often there is a world we can actually land on. Basically, the Normandy swoops into atmosphere and slaps us down in our space car, the Mako, within which we can explore a small area of the surface, allowing us to soak in a variety of environments. I think it's fair to say none of them are going to knock your socks off with detail. They're typically very drab, unchanging spaces with sparse activities, if any. These activities aren't typically groundbreaking, consisting of minor activities, hacking rocks for some reason, and engaging in straightforward side missions across 3 reused interiors. So over the course of an encompassing playthrough, you'll get very familiar with this warehouse layout, this subterranean bunker that some galaxy brain decided to put windows in, and these mine shafts. Yes, the interior reuse for these bits of content can be quite jarring, and if you think driving the Mako across these barren landscapes is a nice thing to break up the monotony of continuously finding yourself in the same space but on a different planet, no. If anything, BioWare deserve a Nobel Peace Prize for their contributions to the field of torture. In the remaster it's certainly slightly better. Having a boost helps. It gives you a smidgen of torque to scale things. I'm not sure how the thing struggles so much to go vertical on an asteroid, but my gripe with the Mako is it's a very inconsistent beast. It's buoyant unless you need it to be. It's poised unless you need it to be. The camera swivel will alter the input needed for forward motion, but has no say on reversing. And the landscapes don't often give you an option to avoid having to scale a mountain the Mako physically cannot scale in order to get to one of these objectives. Many times you just have to Skyrim horse it and hope for the best. Results doing that can be inconsistent for no discernible reason. The positives, however, of being in a 6-wheeled extraterrestrial world-exploring car is often the skybox. There is a vibe to being in this thing on the moon looking at Earth. This is a view only so many brilliantly minded humans have ever had. Likewise, more alien skies are something to behold. Seeing an unfamiliar celestial object in the sky is priceless, and the isolating feeling of that, considering how barren these landscapes actually are, hits home a real, palpable feeling of loneliness and cosmic insignificance. They may not always make for especially riveting content, but the artistic intent is easy enough to feel. I actually would go so far as to say that within itself is impressive, because when you take into consideration what Mass Effect is about, that very obviously is not done without a purpose. So yes, I accept the argument that they could have done more with these spaces, but I fundamentally disagree with the idea that they are somehow wasted. The content within them could, in many areas, be better. but the evocation of cosmic dread is fantastic. Through that lens too, the content itself is not a massive failure. It might follow the basic formula of finding a hint on the Citadel and then venturing out into the galaxy to locate the content, or being contacted by Admiral Hackett as you arrive in a system, which happens so often you can't help but wonder if the Alliance is just you. But once you look past the delivery mechanisms, there's some punchy stuff to be enjoyed. A standout is venturing to Luna, the Earth's moon, where in an underground facility a virtual intelligence or VI has gone rogue. Now, in the Mass Effect universe there's a huge distinction between VIs and AIs. VIs, virtual intelligences, are not sentient, whereas AIs are. So to have a VI go rogue is a simple mission, just find the core and unplug the thing. However, when we do this, we get a message pop up on screen. It's nothing fancy. Nevertheless, it entirely transforms the context of what we've just done. We're told a burst of white noise over all frequencies nearly deafens us. Our hardsuit's heads-up display interprets it into a series of zeros and ones, repeating again and again, blanketing all frequencies until the lights on the final VI cluster flicker and die. If you put those numbers, those zeros and ones, into a binary code translator, you end up with a 4-letter word. Help. So the simple mission of unplugging the faulty computer has completely been transformed by the implication that the computer had become sentient and in its confusion had turned on the people it was working for. That is something infinitely more chilling, boosted by the eerie sounds that play in these bunkers, as much as, dare I say, the simple text used to convey these concepts that extend beyond perhaps what the game is capable of showing us. Sometimes it's the not actually seeing these things that makes the experience that little bit weirder. It's like BioWare understood that Mass Effect one day would be massively outdated and leaned hard into conveying the eerie vibes of an older game. That's the kind of atmosphere I can bask in no matter how many times you throw me into a copy-pasted bunker environment. That shopping centre at midnight vibe is so enticing. Other things Mass Effect's content get right includes having content dedicated to your past, your backstory. If you choose the sole survivor reputation, there is a mission dedicated to that, different to the other reputations. If you choose the Earthborn backstory, there's a mission to do with that again is completely unrelated to the mission that might crop up if you chose Spacer or Colonist. There are many missions beyond that that do expand the lore. So while I definitely agree with the idea that the actual content isn't too much to write home about, there is a constant and impressive communication of ideas. And sometimes the idea is enough. The notion of happening upon a drifting spaceship weakened board is so enticing that it doesn't matter if the interior looks like that of a warehouse. We're here to investigate what the bloody hell happened. The actual flow of gameplay becomes entirely secondary to the creation of an atmosphere that spurs you on. However minor, there is always a story being told. Considering they typically require the commander to be locked and loaded, happy endings are rare. The game wants you to sit on the intense loneliness of the galaxy. It's such a dark contrast to the brightness of the Citadel, and the optimism it represents. I love Mass Effect 1's creepy vibe. It's perhaps one of my favourite things about the game. I'm not a big fan of horror, but when ambient horror creeps into things that aren't meant to be horror, I have a tendency to fall in love. So it's no surprise that Mass Effect 1 gelled with me so well on this. I want to say this is something Mass Effect 2 did well as well, but that game has a lot more rhythm to it. I'm not saying Mass Effect 1's layout is difficult to suss, but I am saying the foreboding ambience bonds well when we aren't experiencing something broken down into easily consumable chunks. There is an element of figuring out your next move, where you're more likely to find yourself allowing the emotions in the game is trying to evoke. That Moorish unease, the undertones of almost anxiety, I want to say, is something the first Mass Effect title capitalized on significantly. So it's no surprise the storytelling also leans hard into it, but before we talk any story stuff further at least, I'd very much like the opportunity to address the gameplay. I've already highlighted how the Mako is almost endearingly crap, but it goes without saying that Mass Effect's gameplay loop goes beyond driving around in a space car. It's a third-person shooter that isn't necessarily well regarded for being the most refined experience in the world. There's definitely some extra refine in the remaster, but generally speaking the experience is for-like. The main thing is we never venture out without a squad, so we choose 2 of our squad mates to accompany us. They have different strengths and of course, we can boss them about on the battlefield. We have 2 command wheels, one allows us to order our squad to change weapons, the other allows us to order our squad to use particular abilities. And you do that while the gameplay still functions as a bog standard third-person shooter, except you don't have ammunition, instead you have an overheat. You need to prevent your weapon from overheating. If it does, you won't be able to fire it for a bit, but provided you keep it from overheating, you'll be fine. You can provide a constant rate of fire, and I suppose it's an interesting idea that maybe futuristic weapons wouldn't need ammo, but I find that more than anything it uninvents something and as a result discourages variation. All you do is find yourself a class of gun you like, find a good example of it, and you'll never have to swap weapons again. I found myself rarely using my pistol, my shotgun, or my sniper rifle. I just used a bloody good assault rifle and rather subconsciously called it a day. So if you see any variance in my footage, there were a few occasions where I consciously made the decision of trying to make my gameplay not look too boring. But beyond those 2 things, there isn't a lot to be said about this game's combat system. It doesn't necessarily feel imbalanced. It did feel a bit more imbalanced in the original version, so the remaster certainly tweaked that. But there is a cover system, your shots tend to land where they're aiming, you have grenades. I'm a big fan of the grenades, but it is reasonably static, old game combat. The biggest altering factor would be the class you choose, which used to dictate which weapons Commander Shepard could use, and Shepard's own abilities in the command wheel. The remaster, as far as Mass Effect 1 is concerned, changed it so only the latter is important. So if you go the soldier class, that appears to be the rounded default. If you want a more techie approach, there are classes that accommodate that, or space magic. There are biotics in the Mass Effect universe, and essentially what a biotic is a person with the ability to create Mass Effect fields, using Element Zero nodules embedded in body tissue. Imagine the Force from Star Wars, but with an attempt at a pseudo-scientific explanation, and you're pretty much halfway there. In my opinion, space magic is space magic. I have nothing against it, but I'm not under the illusion it isn't there to replicate magic. So there is a variety in classes, and those classes do dictate what Commander Shepard is capable of. So call me dull if you fancy, but I like the balance of the even-keeled soldier. If you need a biotic, pick a biotic to join you on the mission. Likewise, if you need tech expertise, that's available in your squad. The only other combat thing to mention is the Mako combat, which again has no ammunition. It just relies on overheating, which is a bit more common for vehicles in games, I find. And you have 2 weapons really, 3 if you're creative. You have a gun, you can fire rockets, and if you're feeling particularly clever, you can also run people over. The Mako's also a resilient machine. You don't have to pay too much mind to the damage you're taking in most scenarios. I think it's reasonable to say, despite its handling characteristics that appear to be inspired by wackiness itself, in combat situations the Mako makes life very easy. In fact, enemy rockets move so slowly through the air you can use the boosters in the Mako to jump over them. So I think it's unsurprising BioWare had to find a means to contrive Mako combat challenges into the game, and that is ultimately what Thresher Maws are there to do. They're just big angry worms that appear on a series of worlds that you can explore. There's no indicator as to when one's going to turn up, they're just kind of there regardless of if the planet could sustain life. I don't know how they get all over the galaxy like this, but they seem to exist purely so that when somebody passes by in a space rover, they can pounce, because, as you know, that's very likely on a barren planet. But I will give the Thresher Maws this, they are explained in lore. There's more to this game than just the combat, you also have hacking, and it's an RPG, so there's an emphasis on finding better gear, weapons and armor. There's a rudimentary leveling system you can set to automatic and completely ignore. This applies to both Shepard and the squad mates. The one element you do have to pay attention to, though, is character consistency, manifesting in your Paragon and Renegade stats. These stats are bolstered by your decisions in dialogue. If you frequently select more Paragon options, you will access Paragon skill checks, and the same goes for Renegade. Unlike Mass Effect 2, however, where this system can undo your playthrough,
Mass Effect 1 is slightly more forgiving with it. Across the entire game, there's maybe one skill check that might have consequences that overarch into Mass Effect 2 and 3, but you can easily bypass it by doing a little loyalty side objective for Rex. So if I'm being honest, I never worry too much about it in Mass Effect 1. But in principle, as you get to the back end of the game, the most interesting dialogue choices are locked behind these skill checks, meaning the game does to an extent reward you for making Commander Shepard consistent. As for how the game communicates what choices are Paragon or Renegade without highlighting them a specific colour identifying them as a skill check, your biggest tell is the positioning on the dialogue wheel. In the context of making a decision, if it's at the top of the wheel, it's Paragon, if it's at the bottom it's Renegade, and if it's in the middle, then it's neutral, which does have some value every so often. This, unless it's a skill check, rather consistently applies to the right-hand side of the dialogue wheel, and the left is typically tailored towards asking questions. It's cleverly set up to avoid confusion where confusion otherwise was a real risk. Does this mean the dialogue is entirely predictable? No. It's really hard in any game to convey the spirit of what's about to be said without spelling it out word for word, but the dialogue wheel being uniform gives you a general idea of what's going to be said, so it sort of cancels itself out. As for the hacking, that's typically for opening containers and the occasional door, and the minigame can best be described as Frogger but circle. The arrow sprite will bounce off orange obstacles, but will be reset if you strike a red one. But this doesn't mean you have to be attentive. The technique of simply pressing a stick works half the time. So you don't have to be especially cautious, a bit of timing and just sending it works a treat. And if you fail, you can always retry. And if you really can't be arsed, just break down some weapons you'll never use into Omnijail and smother the thing with it. It'll open just the same. And as far as I can tell, there's no other use for the stuff. It's purely a hacking, bypassing currency. And that's kind of it for what there is to talk about gameplay-wise. It doesn't play in any way that I would deem special. The strength of Mass Effect 1 comes from other factors, but at the same time it plays passably, so who am I to complain? So, to return to the story, once we saved Liara from a force field she put herself in and recruited her, there are only actually a handful of main missions further. It is an RPG, there's incentive to go off and do other stuff and dilute the story across it, but at some point we've got to lock in and take the fight to Saren, while taking a few bollockings from the Council who object to how we get the job done. But, you know, you can drop the call on them every single time if you want. It's quite funny. Our first stop is a modest colony called Feros, and I have to say I love these orbital shots. I also really enjoy watching the Normandy come into land. There's no sentiment to follow it, I just enjoy the shots. They're good shots. They're there to break up the static interplanetary traversal and make you feel as if you're actually travelling between one destination and the next. It's nice. And as something that neither Mass Effect 2 nor 3 did, you can look out the window on the bridge and see that you are landed. From there, all you have to do is jump out the airlock, and we've arrived. It's nice. From here, it's apparent something is wrong in the colony on Feros. And I don't just say that because I get bad vibes, I say it because our greeting party is murdered by Geth. So we're immediately thrust into the action, and it seems Saren has interests here. He doesn't actually show up here, it would seem he's quite an absent antagonist, but we are taking the fight to his Geth forces at least. To cut a long story short, it's here where we learn the colonists of Zoo's Hope are being mind-controlled by a mysterious plant creature named the Thorian, and it seems Saren sorted out to understand the Prothean visions he's been getting. Its own existence overlapped with the Protheans, and contains a cipher that allows understanding of the Protheans, so it's valuable to both Shepard and Saren. It's furthermore interesting because it has mind control abilities. We'll hang on to that for later though. First we need to kill the thing. We do get the cipher we're after, albeit from an Asari commando, a follower of Matriarch Benezia held captive by the Thorian, and it's through her that we also learn more about Saren. It seems Benezia sought to guide Saren down a gentler path, but was ultimately swayed, as if Saren can somehow control minds. And that has something to do with his ship, Sovereign, that can somehow dominate the minds of Saren's followers. The process is referred to as indoctrination, an irreversible process that renders Saren's beliefs compelling. So we learn a very big detail here. Saren is in the possession of a warship with mind control capabilities, and he's in the pursuit of an ancient race of sentient machines that have the tendency to wipe out sentient spacefaring life. It makes sense, nobody sane would want that.
but Saren isn't banking on the sanity of his followers. In theory, even the most steadfast minds can be swayed, like that of Matriarch Benezia. So in theory, these Reapers can return without anyone thinking it was a good idea. What I love about this is we are at the event horizon of a Lovecraftian mystery. Why is Saren looking to see the return of the Reapers? What does he get out of that? Also, how does Sovereign, Saren's warship, control people's minds and transform them into slaves? The game is building on the idea that Saren is not the true threat. An idea reinforced when we reach our next destination, Noveria, an icy wasteland known for its corporate discretion. There's a bit of back and forth to be had in this atmosphere. It's clear this is where corners get cut, but sure enough, this is where we can find Matriarch Benezia. But not before we're introduced to the Rachni, an insectoid race that's meant to be extinct. The last time they reared their ugly heads, they proved to be a monumental threat to the galaxy. So bad, in fact, the Krogan had to be uplifted from their nuclear wasteland of a planet to fight them. The revelation that they are not in fact wiped out is no doubt alarming, and Benezia is here to gain information from the Rachni Queen regarding the lost Mu relay. It's here where it's confirmed to us that Benezia is not a willing participant in Saren's pursuit, but rather an indoctrinated victim. We slap her and her friends up so hard that she's briefly broken from this mind control long enough to tell us that she'd sealed part of her mind away from the indoctrination, saving it for a time when it could help destroy Saren. In this passing window of clarity, she reinforces the idea that Saren's followers are indoctrinated, so much so that they in fact detach from themselves. Sovereign warps their minds so that Saren's machinations, however sinister, sound justified. The mystery becomes, what is this ship? Benezia confirms the Geth did not build it and its technology is way too advanced. Then she gives us the relay coordinates and we kill her in front of her daughter. We couldn't save Benezia, but there is one being we could save. The Rachni Queen. She communicates with us via a corpse, enabling us an insight into yet another culture. Even this late in the game, Mass Effect 1 wants to throw new things at us. Now we've got to decide the entire future of that culture. We could melt the Rachni Queen in acid and prevent any chance of there being a galaxy-wide catastrophe like there was in the days of old. Or we can take her at her word and believe her when she claims she has no intention of guiding the Rachni down that dark path. The squad mates we have with us will interchangeably advocate for one path or another, but the decision rests with us, to wipe the Rachni out for good, or free the Queen. There's no way of telling at this stage or even in this game if that was the right choice. But it all boils down to what feels like the right thing to do, and that isn't always clear. Saving the Queen is designated a Paragon action, and killing the Queen is designated Renegade. I think how these choices are framed tell us a lot about the morality system of Paragon and Renegade, and how good and evil aren't the point. We can choose to be ruthless and pragmatic, killing the Queen because it's the choice with the least risk, or we can spare the Queen, be idealistic, give her a chance. You can make a compelling argument for either decision, and committing to Paragon and Renegade earlier in the plot doesn't necessarily prepare you for the dilemma. Playing it safe and killing the Queen, however brutal that is, could still be appealing to a Paragon player. It's a test of resolve. Of course, when you've played the game about 600 times like I have, that within itself does fade, but I am still conscious of its purpose. This is a decision that will have a galaxy-wide impact either way. It requires careful consideration, and should your choice contravene what the Council would prefer, prepare for the vocal equivalent of a strongly worded email. This game's portrayal of bureaucracy, while fleeting, is pretty apt. Ashley and Liara then decide, only minutes after the former's mother's death, that now is the best time to figure out which one of them is getting piped by the skipper in the captain's cabin before we inevitably save the galaxy from cosmic horrors beyond our comprehension. Anyway, I'll leave the resolution of that up to your imagination. We have more pressing matters such as Vermeer, Saren's base of operations, where after a brief Mako segment of slaughtering Geth, we rendezvous with a Solarian reconnaissance team that informs us that Saren has cured the genophage and is mass-producing an army of Krogan clones. No doubt that is conflicting news to Urdnot Rex. As cynical as he is, this is the first glimmer of hope for his people he's heard in a very long time. As such, he's not just willing to go along with us destroying the base, as Kirrahe suggests. This potential conflict between Shepard's mission and one of Shepard's crewmates comes out of nowhere, and that is intentional.
If you see it coming, you can prepare for it the first time and avoid a heartache. But if you don't see it coming, regardless of if you have prepared, you don't know, this scene is much more intense, and the consequences can be pretty rough. If you're underprepared and you don't have a particular bias between Paragon and Renegade, or you haven't done Rex's loyalty mission, there is every chance you could absolutely lose Rex here, and he dies, either by your hand or the unhesitant Ashley's. This is meant to be a punishing moment that transcends both Paragon and Renegade. Rex is our ally, we'll be down a powerhouse without him, and I feel it every time because I quite like having Rex in my squad. Being in a standoff with him, trying to convince him that Saren does not have the Krogan's best interest at heart and would enslave them if possible, is a moment that elevates the heart rate some. So as you can imagine, understanding the game, being prepared, and having done Rex's loyalty mission allowing you to talk him down, is a very rewarding moment. Rex trusts us enough to follow us, even if Saren promises the cure of the genophage. Now, the Virmire mission is different still, because this time we aren't the only ones operating. We have a Salarian reconnaissance unit whose lives we are responsible for. We can help preserve their lives by sending either Ashley or Kaidan with them. The other squad mate will make the preparations to plant a nuclear bomb at the center of the facility so it can be blown to oblivion. Considering the stakes, that resort seems reasonable.
The atmosphere on Virmire is more overtly intense. The previous missions allocated time to the establishment of atmosphere. There may be some early skirmishes, but the vast majority of combat is at the back end. Theros doesn't rush us to the realization that something is wrong, instead planting that seed through various things that don't add up as we help the colonists, that culminates in the realization that they're all under the influence of a giant plant. Noveria allocates time to exploring the nature of Noveria and the facilities on it. We're on deeply corporate territory. It's hostile, but not in a way a soldier is familiar with. Everyone's trying to screw each other over. There are no warm, affable, passing conversations like you'd expect on the Citadel. Everyone here has an ulterior motive, and they've come here because that's the agreement. Most people don't want to even talk to us. It lets us know that there might be nobody firing a gun at us yet, but we aren't welcome. It's clear the powers that be here don't want us to uncover the secrets housed on Noveria. As such, that's what we do over the course of tracking down Benezia. Even Theron, which I tend to do right away and don't actually have a right lot to talk about at all, even if it does drop us into the action pretty consistently and pretty early, allocates time to examining the remoteness of the planet in passing, which says a lot about just how old the Prothean ruins here are, and grants us further insight into Liara's solitary personality. Virmire dumps us into the action in the Mako before we know anything. Then after a brief sitrep from an amphibian, we're thrust back into battle. The scenery is bright, luscious, tropical even, existing in contrast to the Geth onslaught. There's not a lot to grab a hold of in the early throes. We have a series of objectives to help Kirahi and his men, so we're too busy paying mind to how we might assist him. But of course, this is intentional, because it all changes when we arrive at Saren's base. There's still plenty of skull cracking to go around, but the discoveries within are where the atmosphere comes from. We can discover indoctrinated Salarians imprisoned in cages to varying degrees of mental disorder. The first is rambly and panicked, trying too hard to convince us he isn't indoctrinated. He doesn't do a good job at disguising that and reveals a harrowing truth. Awareness of the attempts to indoctrinate you are not ample protection. It seems Saren is studying the effects of indoctrination, which absolutely ties back to why he sought out a mind-controlling plant. He's keeping these Salarians cooped up. Some of their minds are completely gone, but one of them seems to have retained his sanity. We get a brief insight into the horrors of the indoctrination process. We also learn this Salarian commando envies those that died during the experiments. It seems more dignified somehow than being reduced to a husk. The victim's identity is typically entirely dismantled. They're a shell of themselves if they're useful, and if they're not, there's simply no self left. As we progress through the facility, we also discover Saren has been making husks, or at the very least studying them. It's interesting that he'd be curious to find out so much about things he's clearly been involved with for some time. You'd think he'd understand, but as we arrive at the heart of the base, that becomes very clear. We're granted access to a dark chamber by Saren's assistant, I suppose, Rana Thanoptis. And to be fair, maybe letting her go was an obvious mistake, but I always do it because I prefer the consequences from an overarching standpoint going into Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3, even if pragmatically it's less than ideal. Anyway, in this chamber we find yet another Prothean beacon, and Shepard interacts with it. Once again we're shown visions, and this time they are more complete than before. They're still disorienting, kinda messy, and it's hard to tell what every frame means, but the vision ends with the reveal of the visage of the Reapers, albeit swiftly. It's 1 or 2 frames, but it bears a striking resemblance to the ship we saw on Eden Prime, does it not? The conversation that follows is where everything becomes clear, as the ship itself shows up to have a conversation with us.
You are not Saren.
It speaks with a rich, deep synthetic apathy. It's apparent the ship itself is sentient. It isn't a depraved creation of the Geth, nor is it under the control of Saren. It's a Reaper. And its name, if you can even call it that, is Sovereign. The Reapers have, at least to some extent, been present already. This phantom we've been anxiously awaiting the return of is already here. Sovereign speaks with a vagueness that taps into a Lovecraftian mastery. It alludes to the intentions of the Reapers, but, much like trying to explain why you do things to an ant, it simply assumes we cannot understand its motives. And Mass Effect leans hard into the idea the Reapers are serving a function that we, as organics, as simple mortals who wither and die after a few decades, cannot understand. After all, you'd imagine there would be a knowledge disparity between a 30-year-old man and a sentient spacefaring metal crayfish that has lived for millions of years. We're facing an enemy that has succeeded where we now must bid to stop it countless times over. It would seem Sovereign's monologue's purpose isn't to tell us about the Reaper's nature and why they do what they do, but to brag. To sober us up to a sense of doom. We've received confirmation the Reapers exist. They're everything the rumours said they were, and they are far closer than we could possibly have imagined. We learn here that the Citadel and mass relays are not creations of the Protheans, but rather the Reapers, to engineer the pathways upon which spacefaring civilizations develop. To a point, they've been in control this entire time. The galaxy is a farm, and the Reapers are coming back to harvest. And the closest we get to an explanation for why is to impose order on the chaos of organic evolution. We have become so dependent on technologies the Reapers brought into existence that overcoming the Reapers at this point seems insurmountable. We can't fall back on the Protheans, they are nothing special after all. They, like us, discovered the very same technologies, and their disappearance was evidently the previous cycle of the harvest. So if Sovereign, the source of indoctrination, is in fact a Reaper, then it means Saren is not deploying mind control, the Reapers are. And that makes Saren's research into the effects of indoctrination just that bit more fascinating. Is he trying to protect himself? Or does he fear he too is indoctrinated? This is such a fantastic example of cosmic horror, both because the game doesn't rush to introduce us to it, but rather eases us into it, only to completely flip this universe on its head with a big reveal. That homeliness the Mass Effect universe inherently possesses is now facing a colossal existential threat, and that didn't come out of nowhere. The hints have been right under our noses the entire time. The Citadel Tower map is even shaped a bit like a Reaper. This reveal is far from out of nowhere, it's woven into the very fabric of the world's construction, a consideration always. Sovereign's voice, cold and booming as he reveals the galaxy's infrastructure, was actually constructed by deep space murder droids, and now they've come back, is so fantastically overwhelmingly intimidating. This scene alone has so much implication, and it wants you to feel it. It conveys excellently who has the advantage. It's not us, it's not even Saren, it's Sovereign, the Reapers, and as soon as that's understood, the conversation ends. However, at the same time, this conversation provides a glimmer of hope. Sovereign didn't have to speak to us. In fact, in many ways, it doesn't make sense that it did. Why would you, a colossal sentient machine, with a mandate to wipe out all spacefaring life, waste time providing insight to those very lives you intend to harvest? Why would it bother to proclaim superiority? The answer seems to be hubris. The Reapers have carried out this very cycle so many times, dating back millions of years, that at this stage they approach their sadistic task
with the arrogance that they cannot be stopped. There's plenty of apathy and implications of incomprehensibility, yet simultaneously they aren't entirely cold and flat. They're clearly inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos deities, in the sense that they are colossal, uncaring extraterrestrial beings that have played their role for so long that they're rather confident that they will succeed until the end of time. But they differ from the idea of a chaotic force. They exist for a purpose and function according to a system. As synthetic beings, it's likely they were created at some point, and their objective is rather comprehensible. What isn't understood at this point is their motivations. Why? Later games dismantle that mystery to varying degrees of elegance, but the main distinction for the Reapers at this point is we know absolutely what they're after, and we aren't just a casualty in their apathetic chaos. Our demise is part of the bigger picture, and Sovereign's just a tad too vain for that to seem like a foregone conclusion. Furthermore, we now have ammunition for our pending confrontation with Saren. Sovereign made it abundantly clear he has no place in the broader context of the Reaper's plans. They systemically bring organic life to an end. Saren is being manipulated. He's a victim too, and that's a tricky line to balance on. He's still every bit a menace, and as Anderson can outline for us in optional dialogue, not a great guy, but even by his own broken, sadistic standards, he's been led astray. The victim of Reaper indoctrination, suddenly his synthetic implants make sense. His own mind has been warped into believing he's doing the right thing, that he's serving the greater good. So much so that he believes he's in control of his own actions. But that's only what Sovereign wants him to believe. He believes he's in partnership with the Reapers, when the reality is he's a little more than a slave. He's aware of what the Reapers intend to do and believes they cannot be stopped, that joining them would save lives, but we know it would not. They use mind control to subjugate organics to further their own objectives and then complete the harvest anyway. What Saren proposes is impossible, foolish even. His mind has been moulded by Sovereign to believe whatever's most convenient. In the words of Sovereign, you exist because we allow it, and you will end because we demand it. There is no coexistence, however unideal. Saren's thoughts are exposed for the clarity they lack. He is simply a tool, no grand architect. It would be very easy for him to lose all of his menace and presence in doing that. But he doesn't. His visage is still terrifying. The music still potently marks his presence, and his voice still chilling. He's a mindless fanatic. But his most dangerous characteristic going forward is his belief that he's somehow still in control. He seems to believe the more control Sovereign exerts, the less capable the subject becomes, and that keeps him from being fully indoctrinated, but whether intentional or otherwise confirms that he is indoctrinated at least to an extent. The fallacy in Saren's logic is further exposed with how he describes Sovereign's view of the Geth. He tells us it is insulted by their worship. The Geth are but a tool, and no amount of belief on their part will change that. So there's a layer to Saren that knows there's no future for organics under the Reapers. The Geth are useful but will never be more than tools. There is absolutely no reason why Sovereign's view would change for organic life. We can make observations about Saren's indoctrination and bring that subconscious closer to the surface. And provided we've paid enough mind to Paragon or Renegade, we can plant doubts in his mind here. We can fracture the delusion, and even if only for a moment it seems to work. But of course, for the time being, it's not enough. He jumps on his hoverboard and green goblins around the place while we shoot at him. But that's not all there is to Saren. Up until a point, he's also right. There is no logic to fighting the Reapers. They've been carrying out this cycle countless times over. What makes us think we'll make a difference this time, aside from being a player character in a video game? Yep, fair point, that would do it. Victory against the Reapers seems highly unlikely, if not impossible. So in a way, Saren also exists to ask questions of the protagonist. His participation is understandable. He's motivated, like us, to preserve organic life. He, like us, understands the Reapers pose a significant threat to the galaxy, to put it lightly, and Saren too is trying to save lives. But his mind has been warped into believing relenting is the only option, whereas we know it's not an option at all. Suddenly, the major distinction between protagonist and antagonist is
hopefulness versus hopelessness, and the price willing to be paid for success. Saren would sacrifice the very nature of galactic life to ensure the survival of spacefaring organics, but that won't preserve the mesmerizing galaxy we've spent the entire game getting acquainted with. That's ultimately the difference. That's why Mass Effect allocates so much time to ensuring we care about this fictional universe. Even before the Sovereign Bonanza, Anderson's previous run-ins with Saren proved he didn't have that very same connection. The best thing about Mass Effect's take on cosmic horror is the backdrop it threatens. Saren didn't necessarily care for that. He doesn't care to spare lives now. In his own words, his intentions are to save more lives than have ever existed. Our objective is to preserve the ones that do. Aside, of course, from anyone silly enough to pull a gun on us. Anyway, Virmire has one last lesson in store for us. Sacrifice. You can't portray the impending threat of a villain, never mind cosmic horrors from dark space, if everyone involved in the struggle makes it out in one piece. So ultimately, to hit home the stakes, at some point inevitably a character must pay the ultimate price. On Virmire, one of our squad mates will not be making it off the surface, a choice that exists independently from saving Rex, and because of how intense that moment can be, is what I like to refer to as a firm kick to the testicles. However, the options are limited to two of our squad mates. It's either Ashley Williams or Kaidan Alenko who are sacrificed. Our only two human squad mates, furthering the theme of humanity finding their place in the galaxy. Martyring oneself in the name of the galaxy's survival is one such way. That being said, choosing who to sacrifice should be way harder than it is. While neither character is particularly uninteresting, they aren't the ones that stand out. Like I said before, Kaidan's baggage has been squared away a long time ago. He's dependable and has lots to say about his past, but doesn't develop as Shepard interfaces with that. Ashley has something to cling to. She has prejudiced attitudes towards aliens, a perspective that exists to be challenged. There's room in her character to develop, something that would be more interesting to see the shift in going forward. So as I said earlier, it's a bit too easy to hand Kaidan the short end of the stick. Not because he's less likable, but because he's less interesting. He's a reliable constant that doesn't need to develop. He could die here without any consequence, but in Ashley's case, she's got that bit compelling her to clear her family name. A sacrifice here would do that, but it's too easy to deny her martyrdom. Players start to factor other considerations, and both characters are more than willing to go down fighting. So you start looking at the practical value, maybe even the gender distribution in your squad, or simply whichever character you like having around more. To make this choice hit harder, both characters should have both had a reason for this to culminate their arcs, and both characters could have also done with a reason to survive. If they survive, it becomes something to explore, and if they die, it becomes a testament to the sacrifice. The emotional impact either way is negligible. We're in orbit by the time the bomb actually goes off. And then aside from passing survivor's guilt in the crewmate that lived, it's dealt with in a very clean way that could have been a lot more interesting. But to an extent I get it. The mission comes first. We know that Saren is seeking the conduit so that the Reapers can return. Having interacted with another Prothean beacon, Liara thinks we can finally make sense of Shepard's vision. So we do the melding thing again. This time the visions are at points clearer. It's the decimation of the Protheans, culminating in the easier-to-spot revelation that Reapers look like Reapers. From this, Liara somehow deduces that the conduit we are seeking is on the planet Ilos. So the mission is clear. We'll need to go to Ilos. After all, that's where we'll next find Saren. I think Tali fails to realise it's a bit late in the game for reservations based on war, so we must prepare ourselves for one last huzzah. However, before we can do that, the Council want us to return to the Citadel, where we expect they're finally ready to send a fleet after Saren, only for them to once again misunderstand the threat and ground us. I wish I could say this was the most foolish and inconsistent the Council gets in the Mass Effect trilogy, but that does get so much worse in Mass Effect 2. Even though it was them that prompted us to find out more about the Reapers, they don't believe the Reapers exist, and still hold the belief that Saren is the mastermind. Even Ambassador Udina agrees with them. The idea of impending doom is too inconvenient, I suppose. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely see what they're getting at here. I just think they probably could have found a way to do this without making the Council seem like a troop of fucking idiots. Fear not, friends, this contrived obstacle won't stick around for long because we have one ally on the Citadel. Keith David.
Captain Anderson has us meet up with him in the Casino Flux. I had no idea he was so into gambling, but he does help us come up with a plan to get out of here. There are two options, one of which culminates with Anderson being arrested, the other results in Udina being punched squarely in the mouth, so as you can imagine that was the winner. With that out the way, we can bugger off and save the galaxy. Props for this Normandy flypast shot on the way off the Citadel. It's a great reminder of what we're fighting for at this crucial moment. Now, to Ilos. I have absolutely nothing to say about the romance scene, by the way. The romance options are very limited in this game, so there are only so many variations to see. Otherwise, for a niche portion of the fanbase, it fulfills a fantasy. But eventually the focus does turn back to the annihilation of all spacefaring species in the Milky Way galaxy. We arrive at Ilos to find Geth's ships in orbit, confirming we are in the right place. So for the only time in the plot, we activate the stealth systems on our state-of-the-art stealth warship, so we can try and drop the Mako on Saren's head. But of course that would be too easy, if not a tad anticlimactic, meaning we'll have to resort to the usual approach of fighting through various layers of Geth, and it has to be said the environment of Ilos is enthralling. We are disturbing yet more Prothean ruins, and it's apparent how old they are through just how thoroughly nature has reclaimed them. It's here where we finally see statues that presumably portray the Protheans. Funnily enough, the Protheans do get portrayed in Mass Effect 3 and they look nothing like this, and that game retcons them as actually statues of a previous race, but that wasn't the intention in Mass Effect 1. In Mass Effect 1, they were the Protheans. It's never explicitly stated to be the case, but there comes a point where it just confuses the point. And while I could talk about yet another intense showdown with the Geth, that's not what wows me the most about Ilos. In fact, anyone who's played Mass Effect 1 knows exactly where I'm going with this. As we get deeper inside the ancient facility, having been reunited with our space car, we enter a chamber that appears to be full of stasis pods, as perhaps one of the most beautiful numbers I've ever heard in a game envelops our ears. The facility is huge and appeared to hold Prothean survivors. One could only marvel at the secrets we might uncover had only one survived. But it's confirmed to us there are no life signs in the pods. However, all is not lost. As we push on, we're eventually halted by a force field, forcing us to get out of the Mako and walk down a side tunnel, then take a lift, at the bottom of which we meet an intact Prothean VI called Vigil, with whom we can converse. It claims that, unlike the other who came through here, we do not possess the hallmarks of indoctrination. It reveals to us some fascinating things. The Protheans were in fact wiped out by the Reapers. This was their last refuge, spared only because of its secrecy. More importantly, we learn about what the Conduit is and why it's so crucial. It's a mass relay that interfaces with a similar mass relay within the Citadel, meaning if the Geth and Saren arrive at the Conduit, they can get inside the Citadel instantaneously and make preparations from within for Sovereign's arrival, at which point Sovereign will bring back the rest of the Reapers, decimating the galaxy from the seat of government outwards. No wonder they're so devastating. They strike hard, swift, and capitalize on confusion. We learn they also created the Keepers, the species of benign organic caretakers that exist solely to maintain the Citadel. So while the Council thinks patrolling the mass relays will do it, Sovereign is planning a surprise attack from within, so perhaps if we just accepted the benching, at least we would be there. Anyway, from this point we learn how the Reapers further isolate civilizations, taking control of mass relays to cut off communication and transportation. The ascension to being able to cross the galaxy is taken away. The very concepts spacefaring civilizations are built upon are no longer available to them and used against them. They are reintroduced to the mind-boggling vastness of space and then world by world annihilated, all without a shred of mercy. What an utterly terrifying extinction for a spacefaring civilization, for the rug of technological advancement to be ripped out from under you, stranding you wherever you stand, to helplessly anticipate the arrival of massive godlike synthetic spaceships that exist for the sole purpose of ending you. And then, once the killing is done, they simply disappear back into dark space, having harvested the masses and leaving their indoctrinated slaves, now devoid of any direction to wither and die. A horrifying fate we are frighteningly close to sharing. Just like with us, why the Reapers do this is a mystery to Vigil. But as the Ball of Light confirms to us, our survival does not depend on understanding them, but stopping them. There is so much more to unpack with Vigil, but if I wanted to do it all, we would be here all day. We know what we need to do now. We need to reach the conduit to get to the Citadel to stop Saren from aiding Sovereign from within, and save the Citadel from the Reaper invasion before it's even begun. But I can't move off of this moment without conveying precisely why I love it. It's a moment of calm. It's a relaxing conversation with an ancient computer that possesses knowledge we cannot possibly hope to obtain any other way. We are actively uncorking the bottle of mysteries in the galaxy, and as a result learn so much about how it actually was, or is, that exists in contrast to what the vast majority of characters within it believe. Vigil on its own is an entire layer of Mass Effect lore that you cannot access from the surface level, but the surface level is so compelling you yearn to know. So while we're in a race against time to get to the conduit to reach Saren to save the galaxy, it's also very easy to lose a quarter of an hour talking to this cluster of light, expiring its dialogue and learning about everything it has to say. One of the most fascinating is the implication the only reason we've made it this far is because of luck. The Reaper's typical method didn't work by some miracle, and Sovereign is deviating from the norm. So once again, a glimmer of hope enters the conversation. We aren't special, but at least we know the Reapers can be inconvenienced. If they can be inconvenienced, they can be moved. If they can be moved, they can be beaten, hopefully. This time around, Sovereign has utilized its incomprehensibility to amass at least one follower it can indoctrinate and then spiral out from there, because it's not invincible and on its own it could be destroyed. Geth and Saren aside, the other Reapers aren't here. Sovereign is on its own. I also like the implication from Vigil that Saren was unlikely to be the first pawn Sovereign cultivated. Vigil also highlights that Sovereign is bold and perhaps even desperate. This fading speck of technology from a long since extinct society is a glimmer of hope, and that makes this scene warm, like an embrace from the past. It's up to us, of course, if we probe it for more information, but its answers are entirely confined to the Reaper invasion. Nevertheless, the first time we try to leave dialogue, we'll be prompted to sap it of all the knowledge it has. For the best understanding possible, the game itself wants us to linger here. And in fairness, every time I play this game, I can't not hear everything Vigil has to say. But at some point, you have to crack on. From here, we barrel our way to the conduit, battling through Geth forces, culminating in the act of driving into a mass relay and launching ourselves at the Citadel in the Mako. It's kind of funny when you think about it. Of course, we smash into the Presidium, making sense of the mass relay statue we can see in this area earlier in the game, and as you can imagine, it's a very different environment to the one we're familiar with now. It's dark, and every other thing is on fire. There are husks running rampant, and Davina is distorted and malfunctioning. It's a complete contrast to the bright, airy, sterile, noticeably not on fire, perfectly functioning Citadel Presidium we're introduced to earlier in the game. The galaxy is about to be turned completely upside down. The seat of government is under attack, and nobody is safe. I'd love to take a moment to talk about just how impressive the cutscenes are in this game. When it comes to portraying colossal objects in space, we know from pretty early on Mass Effect 1 has that covered, but we get to bear witness to the beginning of Sovereign's attack on the Citadel. It's taking fire to limited effect, and if any ship is in its way, it just smashes clean through without the slightest alteration of course. The mercilessness of the Reapers is on full display as Sovereign passes through the Citadel's arms as they close. Every single shot here is a wonder. This space station city has become a cocoon. We know Sovereign is massive, but the Citadel dwarfs it. Mass Effect 1's portrayal of scale once again comes to the fore. As for Saren, he's up at the Citadel Tower, and naturally using the lift would be too easy, so it halts partway up. So Shepard busts out the window, and we head outside. This is one of my favourite shots in the game, not because of the visuals necessarily, but because of the gravity switch. After all, it's artificial gravity, so we just walk up the side of the Citadel Tower. What a fabulous idea that plays into the notion that we aren't on a planet but a space station. Gravity just bent and now we're walking up the side of a building towards a massive Reaper. Fighting our way through yet more Geth to make use of the environment more than anything. But because it's such a cool idea, I have no problem lingering in it to do some battle. Naturally, however, all good things come to a close, and this one does rather swiftly. but it's just a testament to how Mass Effect 1 throws new ideas at you, left, right and centre. It makes up for some of its more generic environments. Nevertheless, the time swiftly comes for our final confrontation with Saren at the Citadel Tower. Once again, we witness where the Council meets, completely upturned. It shouldn't be too much of a surprise that this would be the scene of the final boss fight, however. The location's map is shaped like a Reaper and it's full of enough cover spots to raise the eyebrows of those who know a thing or two about level design. That doesn't include me. Anyway, in our final confrontation with Saren, he reveals that Sovereign has upgraded him. Sensing his wavering commitment, Sovereign ensured that Saren would be more committed than ever. It's alarming how the indoctrinated don't know when their indoctrination is so obvious. But fortunately that nugget of information gives us an in. To avoid fighting Saren here, all we have to do is convince him that he has in fact been indoctrinated, and he doesn't really want this. Of course, if you want a showdown with an avian equivalent to the Green Goblin, there's nothing stopping you. But I find the most fitting end for Saren is convincing him that he's indoctrinated. You can only do this if your charm and intimidate stats are high enough, and this decision I suppose is the culmination of that system. Its ramifications aren't as vast as saving Rex, but I like that we can give this misguided soldier one opportunity to regain control, even if only briefly, and finally do what he believes he's doing. The right thing. It isn't redemption, and Saren is not a good guy deep down. Anderson and Rex tell us otherwise, but Saren's true self does not want the harvest. He doesn't want the Reapers to return. He might not value individual lives, but he doesn't want life itself to cease. Shepard's words are cutting through his programming and bringing the true Saren's doubts to the surface. It won't save him. Reaper indoctrination is permanent, but a moment of clarity is all he needs to give Sovereign a flick on the nose. So sure enough, he takes control and spends his final moments wisely, choosing to go out on his own terms rather than Sovereign's, giving Shepard the opportunity to stop the Reaper invasion before it's even truly begun, his lifeless body falling in slow motion for dramatic effect, leaving us to open up the Citadel's arms and allow the Alliance in to destroy Sovereign. But before we can do that, we have a choice. And I have some things to say about this choice, that it isn't necessarily fair to direct at Mass Effect 1, because it's what Mass Effect 2 and 3 do with it that makes it so frustrating, but that choice is functionally to save the Council aboard the Destiny Ascension. Doing so would cost human lives, but at the same time, the Council hasn't believed us at any step across our journey. They've scrutinized our every action, and they ultimately do stand in the way of humanity's progress. As such, both renegade and neutral choices are to allow the Council to die. The Paragon choice, however, is to save them, demonstrating that humanity has the capacity for selflessness, that we belong, and deserve a seat at the table, because without us, there would be no table. The satisfaction of that is tempting, but at the same time, leaving the Council to reap the consequences of their own inaction is also tempting. I typically choose to save the Council because, in my view, it's the ultimate olive branch. There's no way they'll not take us seriously going forwards, right?
Ah yes, Reapers!
I'll talk more about that when I get round to doing my Mass Effect 2 video, but I get the sense the game wanted us to let the Council die, but gave us the choice anyway. But here the choice does alter the ending somewhat, so it's still valuable. As you can see, the Citadel has become the scene of one giant space battle. And you could tell that somebody at BioWare was cooking that week, because every shot is just marvellous. Obviously, the overall visual aspect has been enhanced by the remaster, but the shots retain the same essence, and it's ultimately that essence that makes it so good. And that brings us to the you thought you'd bypassed the final boss moment, in which Sovereign assumes control of Saren's implants, transforming his lifeless body into a horrifying monster. The Turian Spectre is no more, but that doesn't end Sovereign's influence over his physical form. He's something way more disturbed now, an abomination that amplifies Saren's most terrifying aspects and removes them from anything relatable. Okay, this is a proxy boss fight, considering we can't actually fight a Reaper. The thing is huge, so instead we fight it via Saren's tattered remains, and I think that's a good compromise. The game needs to take the fight to Sovereign physically, so the player feels involved in the victory that's pending. Convincing Saren to top himself allows us to bypass a fight, but it doesn't allow us to bypass the final boss, Sovereign, using Saren's body as some depraved puppet.
The boss fight itself is kind of buggy and can up and break the game, but I love the implications that confirms we were right. Saren was indoctrinated. In fact, there was a husk-like cyborg underneath his skin this entire time, slowly but surely being assembled with various upgrades, finally waiting beneath the surface for the time to come to bust out and become a mindless slave. It's a terrifying thought that even in death you aren't safe from the Reapers. It is a bit strange that Sovereign would allocate so much resources to fighting 3 people on the Citadel while also taking heavy fire right outside the window, but I think in storytelling sense sometimes does have to make way for ceremony. And it isn't like we're entirely unthreatening. It also seems like a major risk for Sovereign to transfer its consciousness to Saren's body, which does appear to be the case because upon being reanimated, Saren's first words are, "I am Sovereign." The reason I say this is weird is because deactivating this abomination is way easier than deactivating the massive Reaper spaceship outside. Doing so seems to stun Sovereign, forcing it to detach from the Citadel tower. Itself created that vulnerability, giving Joker and the Normandy crew the opportunity to piss-missile the thing into oblivion. I'm not saying it's an unsatisfying solution, but it has to bypass a few layers of the cosmic horror to work. As for the actual ending of Mass Effect 1, that I find to be a bit strange too. Firstly, it has this fake-out death scene for Commander Shepard. There's nothing innately wrong with it, it's just to demonstrate how close a call this was. But all the characters believing Commander Shepard is dead for a moment only for Shepard to appear from the rubble is a very predictable trope. I only mention it because it happens way too much in the Mass Effect trilogy and it's going to get more ridiculous. Here, however, it serves its function. The point is, Shepard and the crew of the Normandy won, but only just. And as the following scene with the Council highlights, this has only delayed the inevitable. The Reaper invasion is coming. But more importantly for the confines of this chapter of the story, humanity has found their place in the galaxy. The Council recognizes their efforts to save their lives and offers us a seat on the Council. It is ultimately what the Alliance has been striving for the entire game. Who becomes the first human Councillor is up to us. We can choose between 2 individuals, Ambassador Udina or Captain Anderson, and I wish there was an argument you could make for Udina, the only one being he's a career politician. Otherwise, all he's proven is he's sleazy, underhanded, and a bit of a knob. So in my mind, it's way too easy to choose Anderson. After all, not only did he punch said knob in the face, it was the most consequential right hook in galactic history. He's perfect for the job, not because he's a politician, but he has no problem chinning politicians. He's also a soldier, and with a war with the Reapers inevitably coming, he's the kind of character you'll want to have some sway when they arrive. Beyond that, this ending is a declaration the war with the Reapers hasn't even begun. Never mind having it be over already. Sovereign was but a vanguard. So while Anderson makes a resounding speech about that, Shepard walks away to continue the mission. It's really funny watching the protagonist walk away in the background while Anderson's saying these hard-hitting, motivating lines that get your blood pumping for the next game, but the effect lasts. The galaxy must stand together if we have a hope in hell at stopping the Reapers. Anything less will mean certain doom. But if Sovereign's proved anything, it's that it's doable. And then we get the dumbest final shot of Commander Shepard standing in space! And then the credits begin with the Normandy flying away into space, which is a mesmerizing shot, by the way, marking that the game is now in fact over. It's a good ending, all things considered. Don't get me wrong, the narrative, especially towards the back end, has its ridiculous moments, but they can't subtract from the greatness. The amazing cosmic horror, the fantastic world building, the relevance of the world building, the sense of adventure captured in the race against time to stop Saren, the visual design, the sound design, they all come together. So what makes Mass Effect 1 so special boils down to how complete this fictional universe feels. More or less every detail comes together to sell you a feeling, whether it's the warmth of galactic society aboard the Citadel, or the hard-hitting loneliness of the cosmos as you stand on a barren alien world and gaze upon an impossible horizon. Even being on the moon and looking at Earth, a blue dot against an endless sea of black, feeds into the scratching idea of cosmic insignificance. The genius of the Reapers as a concept for an antagonist is they pair those conflicting things together, bringing the dark, uncaring, lonely reality of space forward as a threat to that warm, welcoming galactic society. We care about that immersive beating heart of the universe, so we care about stopping the Reapers. This blend shouldn't work, but it's brought together so well that you can't help but feel it. Mass Effect 1 then is special, not because it's the best game ever made, it most certainly is not that, but because as far as fictional universes go, it's comprehensive in a way that's encompassing. It isn't content to let us sit on the ideas introduced in the first hour. At no point does the well of what there is to know about this universe dry up. There's always a new concept to learn about, a new star system to explore, a new spectacular way in which the Mako defies the laws of physics to spite you. And the result is this small 2007 game feels incomprehensibly massive, like there's always something new to find, something extra to ponder over. What makes Mass Effect 1 my favourite of the Mass Effect trilogy these days is the fact that this is the game where that feels the most novel. That doesn't absolve it of its weaknesses. What it does do, however, is feel whole. It is trying to capture a multitude of feelings, and more often than not, in my opinion, it succeeds. And while the sequels don't lack for that necessarily, both Mass Effect 2 and 3 are more similar to each other, and very different from this. In some ways they are better, in others they're worse. But when it comes down to it, a franchise couldn't dream of a better opening argument than Mass Effect 1. And that is why, no matter how many times I've played this game before, no matter how old I get, I keep coming back to it. With that, I bring this video to its conclusion. Thank you all for watching. I really
A federal judge has just blocked Donald Trump's secret plans to destroy and conceal records in perpetuity, and this federal judge appointed by George W. Bush was not holding back. When people learned that the Trump regime was circulating internally a legal memo saying that they would not abide by the Presidential Records Act, they would not preserve presidential records, declaring it unilaterally to be unconstitutional. Obviously, it was passed following Richard Nixon's corruption and crimes, and no one ever challenged it. It was just a foregone conclusion. When you're in office, you preserve your records. They don't belong to you. They belong to the people. We obviously know Donald Trump got in a lot of trouble for taking presidential records and bringing them to Mar-a-Lago when he shouldn't have this first time around. And so the Trump regime's like, we're just not going to abide by Presidential Records Act. And so, they would do things like they would speak on Signal chats, encrypted apps. They would apparently be having all of these text communications in the course and scope of executive functions. All of this stuff is relating to the executive branch work. Is supposed to be preserved and protected, but the Trump regime is viewing, we're just going to delete all of this because the Presidential Records Act doesn't exist. Now, a judge is blocking this. I think we're going to have to get to the next question of what has been deleted already and what ramifications will follow, because this George W. Bush appointed Republican judge says, what are you talking about? The Presidential Records Act is definitely constitutional. You can't just declare it invalid. And one of the Trump regime tactics was that they were trying to challenge the standing of anybody who would file the lawsuit to block them from violating the Presidential Records Act, saying, well, there's really no one who's able to bring the lawsuit in the first place. Therefore, we're just going to destroy all of the records. Now, this federal judge, Judge Bates, begins the order by citing 1984, George Orwell's novel 1984. And we've seen a lot of federal judges, Trump-appointed judges, Bush-appointed judges, Reagan-appointed judges, and Democratic-appointed judges often lead court opinions by citing 1984. Never a good sign when you see that as a common trend. So here's what, let's do what we do here on the Midas Touch Network. Let's dig through this legal document. Here's what it says. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. Cited, George Orwell, 1984. Perhaps with that lesson in mind, Congress enacted laws to ensure that government records are created, preserved, and made available to the public. Among those, is the Presidential Records Act, which mandates the preservation of materials related to official responsibilities of the president.
There I was, thinking of ways to cure my boredom, and naturally the idea of a part 3 to 10 Mass Effect Trilogy secrets many players missed sprung to mind. That doesn't mean that you as an individual have missed these secrets, it just means that many players will, because many players blitz through games and don't really have much regard for the secrets on their first playthrough at the very least. Whether or not they're interested in this content is up to them. I just love talking about secrets that can be found in video games, so if you've found all 10 of these, then give yourselves a pat on the back. But anyway, please enjoy 10 Mass Effect secrets many players missed, part 3. Of course, before we begin, spoiler warning for the Mass Effect trilogy. I'm not entirely sure why I didn't do that for the other 2 parts, but hey, you live and learn. Secret number 1 is the fate of Joker's family in Mass Effect 3. After completing the mission Priority Thessia later in the main story, Joker will crack a joke at the expense of the Asari. When shot down by Commander Shepard for it, Joker will remind the commander that he's well aware of what's at stake.
I guess the Asari are wishing they had fewer dancers and more commandos right about now. Too soon?
In case you hadn't noticed, we just lost a few million people. This isn't the time.
You see this? Tiptree. Little colony out in the ass end of nowhere. My dad lives there. So does my sister. Reapers rolled in about 2 weeks ago. So you can assume that I'm generally aware there's a war on, Commander.
Joker's family were on the planet Tiptree when the Reapers attacked. Later, in a conversation between Joker and Liara, we can overhear that refugee spacecraft from Tiptree have been arriving on Solarian worlds. However, there's no sign of Joker's father or sister. However, when at the Huerta Memorial Hospital on the Citadel, we can overhear a story from an Asari huntress who was on Tiptree when the Reapers invaded.
We were deployed to Tiptree. It's a small human colony. We were supposed to help with evac. The enemy was landing. Just scouts, Centurion things, a few of the big ones. And we were spread over half the continent, getting colonists to shuttles, wiping out husks. We're at this little farm. We'd killed a few enemy scouts, and it's quiet. The shuttle gets called away for support, so I'm there for the night. The humans get me dinner, show me around. One of them, this freckled farm girl, maybe 15. She wants to hear all about what it's like to be a commando. And she's saying she wants to be a pilot, and I say that life on a ship is grimy. And she asks if I'd like to use their shower. So I'm in the shower with hot water and everything. And that's when Neaira came.
Neaira was another huntress on your ship?
Yeah, a friend. I wanted it to be more than that, but she had a medical condition.
It's okay. It's in the file.
The farm girl calls in to me that another Asari is here. I thought the shuttle had gotten back early. I come out in a towel, and Neaira walks through the door. But it wasn't her. Not anymore. She's got this glow. And the Reapers. They did to her what they do to everyone. She's covered in, I don't know, glowing. She reaches out. Her eyes go black. And she touches one of the farmers, and he just dies. They panic. She rips them apart, sometimes touching, sometimes opening them up with biotics. The humans are turning into liquid. And I'm there, in my towel with no gun. And husks start pouring through the door. Got it. So I ran. I got out of that farm and into the hills. I pulled the farm girl after me. All I wanted to do was live through the night.
Nobody else could have done more.
But morning came and no shuttle. Afternoon and then night, and I'm hiding from husks and those Turian things.
The file says the evacuation team thought your position was overrun.
So after 2 days, I still don't have a gun because those Turian things can't use theirs. I realize that shuttle isn't coming. Not unless I get back to the farm and my radio.
And the farm girl?
She was with me. Even killed a few husks. With a stick.
So you went back to the farm?
We snuck down the hill. We were hungry, filthy. They'd turned the towel into a kind of tunic. They'd cleaned up the bodies to make more husks, I figured. But there were still farmers alive. They were being held prisoner. And Neaira was there, directing the other forces. I could see her. I got within 10 meters of her. I just had my gun.
What happened next?
I got to the prisoners. The farm girl unlocked their restraints, and that's when they all started screaming.
Memorial Hospital. The prisoners were indoctrinated.
You think?
And once the alarm was sounded?
Neaira's eyes were black. The whole time, not just for a second. I could feel her mind from where I was standing. And the humans were in the way, attacking us. I used my biotics, flung them around. I'd been horrified when Neaira tore the farmers apart, but goddess, I ripped them in half. And it felt good.
There's nothing shameful about feeling an adrenaline rush during battle.
I might have killed more than Neaira and those husks did. She wanted them alive, to turn them, and I...
And you survived.
We tried to run, again, but we were blocked. And the farm girl? Her leg was broken, bleeding bad. I knocked down a wall in a barn with a big warp field. I was so proud of that. And we hid.
They must have searched for you.
I'm an Asari huntress. No damn husk is gonna find me unless I let it.
But the farm girl who was with you?
Her leg was broken. She was whimpering, and then Neaira, I saw her through a hole in the wood. She was coming closer with those dead black eyes. And Hillary, the farm girl, she couldn't stop crying. They were gonna hear.
What did you do?
What do you think?
The Hillary in this story would later be confirmed by writer Patrick Weeks to be Joker's sister, meaning that during the events of Mass Effect 3, Joker's father and sister were killed during the Reaper invasion of Tiptree, and at no point does he get confirmation. However, it's implied that Hillary may have survived were the Asari not forced to kill her. Secret number 2. During Samara's loyalty mission in Mass Effect 2, you join Samara in hunting her Ardat Yakshi daughter. Now, the Ardat Yakshi have a particular defect that affects their nervous system, and during mating will completely overpower and dominate a partner's, which would hemorrhage the victim's brain and cause death. Well, upon finding Morinth, you can actually side with her and kill Samara instead. Morinth will then join the Normandy's crew, and I suppose in a sense you can romance with her, and die.
I never really feel the love of another, at least not for long. I don't suppose there's anything I can do about that. But I want you to know something. My lover spent their last moments experiencing pleasure you can't imagine. Like Neff. She died because her nervous system overloaded with an ecstasy so great she couldn't handle it.
Why tell me this?
I want to give you that, Shepard. I want you to feel every nerve in your body pulsing with pleasure.
My mission is too important to risk that, Morinth.
But you're different. I sensed it when we first met. You have the Prothean cipher in your head. You died and came back. There's no one like you. You and I can share something so intense, so deep, it will change your life.
Morinth, I can't deny how much I want you.
Do you really mean it? You'll be with me?
I will.
Come here, Shepard. Embrace eternity.
Secret number 3 is reserved for players who cock up their Mass Effect 2 run incredibly badly, as during the suicide mission, provided you've done no loyalty missions and choose all of the wrong options, every single member of the squad can die, including Commander Shepard. I feel like to mess up that badly though, you have to deliberately go out of your way to do so, but I'm assuming the vast majority of Mass Effect fans know about this one, so we're going to move on quickly. Secret number 4. When on Surkesh in Mass Effect 3, you can really get on the nerves of this Salarian simply by touching things.
Please don't touch that. As I said, Commander, don't touch that. Again, I would ask you to refrain from touching that. Perhaps don't touch that in something different from your language. I would rather not refer this matter to the human embassy. Touch it all you want. You'll never find out what it does. Are humans really so deprived of stimulus that they must insist on touching everything? I'm afraid if you keep touching that, you risk a diplomatic incident. Further manipulation of that object is grounds for further admonishment. Really? You must stop touching that. Once more, the Solarian Union formally requests that you not touch that. Fine. If you are so enamored of that object, then I suggest you get your own features analyzed. We've already been down that road. No more.
Secret number 5. If you carry out Zaid Masani's loyalty mission after the suicide mission, in which he hunts down his former friend and gang leader Vito, with no regard whatsoever for human life, you can leave him behind to die.
You can't be serious. You need me. Screw you, Shepard.
Secret number 6. In the Theseus system of the Attican Beta, you can find a planet named Logan. At first, it may come across as your bog standard gas giant. However, if you inspect it, you get an interesting bit of dialogue. Logan is a standard hydrogen-helium gas giant. The survey team who charted the system 20 years ago reported many strange disturbances in Logan's cloud bands, suggesting many remarkably large solid objects were present beneath the cloud tops. As the ship approached, however, they subsided one by one. These disturbances have not been reported again. Creepy, but sadly we don't get to find out what these disturbances were. Secret number 7. If we head to the Antaeus system within the Hades Gamma cluster, we can encounter another gas giant known as Ploba. Inspecting it will reveal that active scans by survey ships have returned tantalizing indications of massive solid structures deep within the atmosphere, too regular in pattern to be anything natural, leading some to believe that Ploba was a Jupiter brain, a planet-sized supercomputer. Adherents of this theory have fruitlessly beamed signals towards the sunken megastructures, hoping to get the machine's attention. Others believe that an ancient spacefaring race disposed of their weapons of war by dumping them into the planet. The last attempt to reach and salvage Ploba's deep anomalies went tragically wrong and ended with a crew of 12 being trapped and crushed in the gas giant's lower atmosphere. We can also recover some matriarch's writings from here, though the origins of the object carrying them is impossible to determine. Whether this planet serves as a graveyard for ancient weapons of war, or a massive supercomputer is unknown, and it's a mystery we never get to solve. Secret number 8 brings us down to the medbay in Mass Effect 2, where we can interact with Mordin Solus. Of course, you can interact with your crew aboard the Normandy on a regular basis, however sometimes they won't have anything to say and will simply ask if you could ask them later. Garrus, for example, is always doing his calibrations. Mordin, on the other hand, has a variety of hilarious excuses that he can use to avoid a conversation with the commander. However, one of them is a bit unpleasant and eyebrow-raising for certain.
Have you got a minute to talk?
Perhaps later. Trying to determine how Scale Itch got onto Normandy. Sexually transmitted disease only carried by Varen. Implications unpleasant.
This implies that somebody aboard the Normandy has obtained an STD that is only carried by Varen, also known as the Space Murder Dogs. This means that somebody aboard the Normandy has fucked a Varen. Who? It's never confirmed who has had sexual relations with a Varen, however I have some suspects. It could be Joker, Zaid, Kelly Chambers, Engineer Donnelly. I knew it was you. Let's not get too caught up in that one. Moving on, in Mass Effect 2, in the Omega Nebula, you can visit the Armada system, and it's here where you will find a gas giant called Angia. Here you can read about penetrating scans that reveal large numbers of hollow, unpowered objects with dimensions of 3.14 by 12.566 by 28.26 meters. that appear to have wings or sails circulating the equatorial bands of the planet. These sails or wings allow them to float in Angier's clouds. Apparently they're too deep to be reached for study, but a popular theory holds that they are coffins of an ancient alien race who laid their dead to rest in the gas giant, which is a cool hidden detail I suppose many people won't pay attention to. Finally, secret number 10 isn't actually in the games, however it was a part of the Cerberus Daily News that would release parallel to the days following the release of Mass Effect 2 back in 2010. The Cerberus Daily News would reveal all sorts of fascinating lore information and Easter eggs, and, while it's not a part of the Legendary Edition, can be found archived online. One Easter egg that can be read here is a reference to Superman. It reads as follows: DC 1938, a small garden world circling the red supergiant SM-2183 Rua exploded today in a rare phenomenon called core fusion. The planet's uranium core collapsed in on itself, igniting a thermonuclear explosion large enough to rupture the planet into several pieces. The shock wave and loss of atmosphere has reportedly killed more than 5 billion native inhabitants. There is one known survivor, an infant rocketed from the planet in an FTL escape pod picked up by the human cruiser MSV Kent. The inhabitants of the planet, previously unknown to the galaxy, were a spacefaring race who use crystalline matrices for their computing needs. The infant has been taken to medical facilities in the local cluster where he is breathing gases in a ratio similar to the atmosphere of his home planet: 65% nitrogen, 20% oxygen, and 15% krypton. DC 1938 references Superman's first appearance in DC Comics in 1938. MSV Kent references the Kent family who found the alien boy who would become Superman. And the nods go on. I think it's a pretty cool reference. Anyway, that brings us nicely to the end of today's video on 10 more Mass Effect Trilogy secrets that many players missed. Maybe you didn't. Let me know, of course, down in the comments section. And of course, point out any other secrets you'd like me to explore. Whether they are Mass Effect related, Red Dead related, The Witcher 3 related, Skyrim related, or any other game I'm yet to cover in this series, let me know about it down in the comments section. I look forward to reading what you have to say. Thank you all for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends and all that wonderful stuff. That would be super fantastic. If you haven't already, be sure to check out my history channel Decades. If you like history, there is a link in the description that you can follow and you can see everything we do over there. With any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point, but until next time, please take care and goodbye.
So I was going through the Mass Effect 5 teases, and yeah, I know P7s, here we go again. But this time around, I noticed a connection between the teases and unanswered mysteries and questions from the entire series. Like with the dropped dark energy plot from Mass Effect 2. During Tali's loyalty mission, we discover a star that's aging way faster than it should be, which is a problem the series never really followed up on. But now, this Mass Effect 5 concept art is showing stars in very similar states. Unstable, dying, and behaving completely wrong. The dark energy plot is clearly not finished yet. And if we look at all these other questions, like what happened to the Geth after the Reaper War, how the Asari recovered after Thessia's fall, and so many more, most of these plots appear to be continuing. Not brushed over, but being revived from where it last left off. And it's not just the Milky Way mysteries that's making a comeback. Mass Effect 5 is teasing Andromeda's biggest secrets being answered too, like who the benefactor is, the origin of the Jardan, and the one mystery that I think is way bigger than we think it is, what's going to happen with the Quarian arc.
Arc 6 is away.
When you combine all those teased mysteries with the wild questions BioWare themselves asked on N7 Day 2023, it starts to feel like something bigger is going on. It feels like all these plots that have gone unanswered for years are finally going to be answered in Mass Effect 5. So let's dive right into the first mystery that Mass Effect 5 appears to be answering. Is the dark energy plot returning? Like I just mentioned, we first saw hints of this plot during Tali's loyalty mission in Mass Effect 2, when she investigated a star that was aging way faster than it should have been. And the reason why the star was aging too fast was because of the Geth. They were using dark energy to accelerate the life cycle of Dolan for some unknown purpose that Tali never discovered. Now obviously, this was supposed to connect to the larger story of why the Reapers existed. Former lead writer Drew Karpyshyn actually planned for biotic dark energy and excessive relay use to be accelerating the end of the universe, which would have meant that the Reapers were harvesting advanced civilizations to find a solution to this dark energy crisis. In terms of plots, it would have been way better than the strange Leviathan and Catalyst plot we did get. Unfortunately though, that plot didn't pan out, since Karpyshyn left during Mass Effect 2's production. But now, the dark energy plot appears to be making a comeback. This Mass Effect 5 concept art by Marco Iazzi has shown us stars in extremely similar states to the one Tali was investigating. There's clearly massive star instability, and even signs in other concept art pieces of stars stealing energy from nearby ones. And the biggest dark energy plot confirmation of them all was when the executive producer for Mass Effect, Mike Gamble, liked Kayla Elizabeth's tweet about her excellent Dying Stars video, which is a very specific thing for Gamble to acknowledge if the dark energy plot was completely abandoned. So putting all these pieces together, it's starting to look less like a coincidence and more like a revival of one of the biggest mysteries in Mass Effect. And if that mystery really is being revived in Mass Effect 5, then the galaxy Shepard saved might be facing a very different kind of threat in the next game. I'm pretty sure one of the biggest mysteries in Mass Effect Andromeda will actually connect to this particular returning plot thread. But we'll get to that mystery later. For now, let's go into another mystery that specifically Mass Effect 3 left hanging, which was, what exactly happened to the Geth? Depending on the choices players made during the trilogy, Geth history can look very different. In some playthroughs, the Geth are wiped out during the war with the Quarians or the Destroy ending, and in others, they might be more prosperous than ever before. Putting the endings aside though, for the vast majority of players, the latter outcome is what most players chose. According to Legendary Edition statistics, around 80% of players actually achieved peace between the Quarians and the Geth, which leads to one of the most emotional moments in the entire series, Legion's sacrifice.
Legion, the answer to your question was yes.
I know, Tali. But thank you. Keyless Line.
After helping Shepard broker peace, Legion uploaded the Reaper code to all Geth, allowing them to evolve beyond simple networked programs. For the very first time, they began thinking and acting as true individuals. And right before Legion dies, it says something incredibly important. Instead of referring to itself as this unit, he finally says, I. A tiny word, but a massive moment for the entire story of synthetic life in Mass Effect. And despite all the many choices we could have made to prevent that moment, it looks like the mystery of the Geth's fate is continuing along Legion's journey. We're now seeing the Geth wearing clothes for the first time, a clear indication of individuality. So once again, one of the larger mysteries after Mass Effect 3 with the Geth is being definitively answered. Regardless of our choices, there exists some Geth that are self-actualizing even further, continuing the same plotline that Legion began in the trilogy. But not every plotline from the trilogy had such a definitive conclusion. Like, for example, the mystery of what happened to the Asari after the fall of Thessia.
There are preparations to make, continuity of civilization to consider. I never thought this day would come.
When Thessia fell in Mass Effect 3, it wasn't just another battlefield in the Reaper War. It was the fall of one of the oldest and most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. A race that had spent thousands of years guiding galactic politics suddenly found itself completely upheaved. No matter what choices players made during the trilogy, the damage to Asari civilization was immense. But what's interesting is that some of the Mass Effect 5 concept art appears to show massive Asari engineering projects now underway, like this one here. Enormous space elevators like this are stretching from the planet's surface likely all the way into orbit. And this same swooping architecture matches the same designs from Thessia and early concept art from Mass Effect 3. So very likely, these space elevators we're seeing now are a result of what happened to the Asari during the Reaper War. Many Asari worlds after the Reaper's devastation were left polluted and heavily unstable, and we're seeing now that races are wearing masks on what's likely Asari worlds. So instead of returning to the same powerful civilization we knew from the trilogy, the Asari in Mass Effect 5 might actually be in the middle of rebuilding their society. They might be forced to travel from planetside up into orbit due to the vast pollution present, which we also see in this illustration featuring an Asari on the side of this building. What's very likely Ilium, due to the same style of buildings being present, has a mysterious red haze covering the cityscape. So across all Asari worlds, the most ancient race in the galaxy is likely entering an entirely new era of pollution and rebuilding, which naturally leads to the next major mystery after the biggest war the Milky Way had ever seen. Now that the Asari are no longer in a position of strength in the galaxy, which race is going to succeed them? I think Mass Effect 5 is already answering that question pretty definitively, with one race in particular: humanity.
We face our enemy together, and together we will defeat them.
When Shepard gave that speech during the final battle of Mass Effect 3, humanity wasn't yet the most powerful species in the galaxy, but through the Alliance's coordinated war effort, Earth became the center of the final push against the Reapers, and humanity proved something the rest of the galaxy hadn't fully realized yet. When everything was on the line, humans were the race willing to unite everyone else. And after the war, that leadership carried forward into the rebuilding of the galaxy. We saw that the Citadel ended up staying above Earth, connected to London with a space elevator. And now, in Mass Effect 5, we're seeing what looks like a location on the Citadel, based on how diverse the races in this illustration are. We have new races we haven't seen before, but also Krogan, Salarians, Turians, Asari, and most plentiful of all, humans. We'll chat later about this Angara here in a bit, but it's fairly clear that this is likely showing us a Citadel that's still above Earth. Something that's really funny to me is how there's a jellyfish in the corner here, which humans would definitely add as random ambiance in the Citadel. Putting the jellyfish aside though, humanity is clearly still in a position of strength within the galaxy by likely still housing the Citadel above Earth. And what's more, they may now be creating an entirely new relay network with their newfound power. I'll be doing a full breakdown of how this new relay connects to the new N7, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that future video. What I will go into now though, is that this relay is likely the physical representation of humanity not messing around anymore. The balance of power in the Milky Way is going to look very different the next time we return to it, with potentially humanity being the top power, shaping the future of the galaxy. Now obviously, there's a lot more going on in the Milky Way, like the Krogan engaging in civil war. But figuring out exactly what's going on with that war is a mystery that deserves its own video, so we'll tackle that one in a future video too. Now even though all these questions and mysteries so far have centered around the Milky Way, it's actually Andromeda that has far more juicy mysteries. And very crucially, some of the biggest mysteries in Andromeda were unanswered for a reason, unlike the ones from the trilogy. When 3 of the games in a series are interlinked in a massively sprawling trilogy, naturally, the majority of the series' mysteries will be tied to that trio of games. And of course, in telling a story on that scale, some plot threads will inevitably be dropped, like Tali's dark energy plot, while others will be left open-ended, with no clear answer, like where each race left off after the Reaper War. Clearly, at the time, these plot threads were either left to die, or to be answered at an arbitrary future date. But there's a few mysteries in Mass Effect Andromeda that are different from this. They aren't just unanswered mysteries. They were intentionally left unanswered, with a clear design to be revealed at a specific time. Questions like, who was secretly funding the Andromeda Initiative from the shadows? And who were the ancient builders in the Helios cluster, known as the Jardan? And the one mystery that almost nobody talks about, but is clearly bigger than we expect, what actually happened to the Quarian Ark? All of these mysteries have been teased very subtly so far, like the voice mentioning Arc 6. And since Mass Effect 5 is already hinting that the Milky Way and Andromeda will connect, then these intentional Andromeda mysteries likely aren't just going to be answered. They have a very high chance of interconnecting to the Milky Way mysteries we just went over, unlocking entirely new meanings to all of them. And Andromeda's first key mystery involves one of the most suspicious figures in the Andromeda Initiative, the Benefactor. Obviously, major Mass Effect Andromeda spoilers will follow. In an interview about the Benefactor's identity, Gamble said this: "The mysterious Benefactor is intentionally left unresolved, as it has deeper ties to the meta-story of the Mass Effect Andromeda saga. By the time you find the killer, they're long gone." Which is a very interesting way to describe the mystery, because it suggests the Benefactor isn't just some anonymous donor funding the initiative from the sidelines. Whoever they are, they're deeply tied to a larger story within the Mass Effect universe, meaning that this particular mystery is definitely going to appear in Mass Effect 5. And if we look closely at the clues we already have, it's pretty clear that the Benefactor has ties to humanity. After Garson was murdered, one of her datapads mentioned that in 2179, the Benefactor once mentioned that a storm was coming, and they said that the evidence was clear. Garson herself didn't know this, but the Benefactor clearly knew about the incoming Reaper threat to the Milky Way 4 years before Commander Shepard did. And obviously, the fact that the Benefactor funded the Andromeda Initiative means that they had massive amounts of funds. So with these two pieces of information, the likely identity of the Benefactor is someone from Cerberus. The Elusive Man founded Cerberus after learning about the Reaper threat in 2157, meaning that Cerberus had knowledge of the Reapers before Shepard did. And once EDI became unshackled, we learned something else about Cerberus. They had access to enormous amounts of funding from their many illegal operations, meaning that the mysterious Benefactor likely has huge ties to one of humanity's most infamous organizations, which adds another wrinkle to one of the mysteries about humanity we're currently seeing. This Cerberus-colored relay that humanity is building likely has ties to the Benefactor themselves, meaning that they are likely one of the most important figures in the next chapter of Mass Effect. And very crucially, if this theory is legit, it means that one of the larger mysteries of what's happening with humanity is being tied to one of Andromeda's major mysteries. The Milky Way and Andromeda are connecting by intertwining their unanswered plot threads, which is likely an intentional choice for the meta-story of Mass Effect, which is a trend that continues with our next Andromeda mystery, who the Jardan are. In one of the most shocking mysteries I've ever seen, the unknown builders in the Helios cluster had created the native Angarans, adding even more confusion to the Jardan's motives. In the conversations with Jaal after this revelation, he expressed being at a loss as to how he should move forward with this information. After all, what does one's culture, traditions, and familial lines all mean, knowing that your race was created by a different race? Which is a very coincidental plot thread that mirrors the Geth's own journey in the Milky Way. When the Quarians began hearing questions of the Geth having souls, a few trigger-happy Quarians rejected their newfound identities, which of course led to all-out war and a resolution that Commander Shepard decided centuries later. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, it appears that there are Geth in Mass Effect 5 who continued their self-actualization, no matter what decisions Shepard previously made. Undoubtedly, it's not a coincidence that the first Angaran we've seen teased is in such close proximity to the Geth enclodes. Both races mirror each other in being created by other races. Once again, a Milky Way and Andromeda plot thread intertwining with each other, which means that the creators of the Angara are likely one of the bigger plot threads in Mass Effect 5. And the more we look at the evidence, the more the Jardan start to look less like an entirely new race and more like something we've actually encountered before. There's a piece of concept art for Mass Effect 5 showing Remtech, which is the technology the Jardan built, and it shares a striking resemblance to this Prothean shard. The same geometry that defined Prothean design is present in both images. Again, a Milky Way race and an Andromeda race mirroring each other, which to me might literally mean that the Jardan's mysterious identity is directly connected to the Protheans. But what really ties this together is the Scourge. The massive dark energy cloud that stretched across the Helios cluster wasn't a natural phenomenon. To my knowledge, it was created inside a remnant facility, meaning the Jardan deliberately engineered dark energy on a scale the Milky Way has never seen before, which can easily connect to the dark energy plot from earlier, and the concept art of unstable stars that Mass Effect 5 is now showing us. The dark energy from the trilogy was aging stars unnaturally. The Scourge we know of has strange time manipulation properties, and now we're seeing exploding stars in this concept art, which means that Mass Effect 5 might not just answer the question of who the Jardan really are, but also wrap up multiple mysteries all at once. The Jardan's true identities, why they created the Angarans, and how the dark energy plot will resolve probably won't be answered separately. All these mysteries are converging, making another major Andromeda mystery at the heart of whatever Mass Effect 5 holds, which leads me to arguably the biggest Andromeda mystery after the end of the fourth game. What in the known universe happened to the Quarian Ark? In the book Mass Effect Annihilation, we actually followed the crew of Ark Kilasia as it made its way to Andromeda. But the journey didn't go very smoothly. A deadly plague had spread through the Ark, and by the time the story concluded, the fate of everyone on board was left deeply uncertain. Yes, the plague was eventually taken care of, but if the Quarian Ark would ever make it to the Helios cluster was still up in the air. And unlike the other Arks that eventually arrived, the Quarian Ark never got resolution from its planned DLC. It simply vanished, which is exactly where the mystery left off when Mass Effect Andromeda ended. But then, in the Game Awards trailer, we heard this.
Ark 6 is away. Godspeed.
It's such a quick moment, but it's one of the most loaded lines out of every tease we've gotten so far. Because if you look at all the Mass Effect 5 concept art and illustrations we've seen, Quarians are almost completely absent, and I don't think that's an accident. The lack of Quarians feels deliberate, like BioWare knows exactly how much weight their return carries, and they're saving it. So however the Quarian Ark finally shows up in Mass Effect 5, it likely isn't going to be brushed over content. It's probably going to be one of the bigger reveals. And speaking of reveals, there's one more layer to all this that I think changes how we see everything we've just gone over. And it comes directly from Gamble and BioWare themselves in this very specific blog post from N7 Day 2023. Now in this post, Gamble didn't just provide teases. He asked questions. Specific, deliberate questions that he clearly knew would set the fandom on fire. And the first one hits immediately. What happened to everyone you know and love in the games? And when you look at the N7 Day 2023 illustration, Joker and EDI are potentially right here. Garrus is also potentially in that same illustration, depending on who you think this Turian is. And Rex might even be in this Geth Crater image. So when Gamble asked this seemingly random question, I think subtly, it actually functions as an answer. BioWare might be telling us that the people we spent 4 games caring about are going to get some kind of answer in Mass Effect 5, even if they aren't necessarily companions this time around. And then there's Gamble's second revealing question. Who really died? Which is such a ridiculously loaded question. Why bring that up unless the answer actually matters for Mass Effect 5's story? Maybe it refers to Shepard? Or maybe it even refers to someone like the Elusive Man? It's clearly an important question, otherwise Gamble wouldn't have dropped it on us. But as to whose death might be reverted is anyone's guess. After that bombshell second question, Gamble outdid himself with the third one. Who had kids with whom? Which implies a time jump of at least 5 or so years from the end of the trilogy. And of course, to add more chaos to this question, we've seen members from the Tempest crew more than anyone else. This is very likely showing us Ryder, which makes sense with an Angaran being so close by. So if Gamble is asking questions about who had kids with each other, while Andromeda crew members are clearly in the Milky Way, then the timeline for Mass Effect 5 is officially in timey-wimey territory. Can Mass Effect 5 have both kids belonging to trilogy companions and the Tempest crew at the same time? I personally think so, if maybe wormholes are a thing, but that's a theory for a different day. The last question here Gamble posed to us was, what does a baby Volus sound like? For this one, Gamble clearly avoided mentioning the word baby along with any race from the main trilogy's companions, so he wouldn't spiral too much. Although, maybe our favorite biotic god did have kids? Who knows? What this question is really telling us, though, is that we'll likely see new nuances to the races in Mass Effect 5, like Asari children, Quarian children, and even Turian children, which is something that might even be tied to the second question of who had kids with whom. But before we spiral too hard thinking about that, Gamble provided a second set of questions that honestly tells us way more than the first set did. And the first one here was, what about all the galaxies? Which makes a lot of sense to ask, considering all the Milky Way and Andromeda implications we've been seeing. And it likely also acts as a subtle hint at where Mass Effect is heading long term. Mass Effect 5 will likely bridge the Milky Way and Andromeda, but the franchise itself seems to be building towards something even larger than that, with other galaxies on the horizon for future games, which ties directly into Gamble's second point. The endings. He absolutely didn't have to bring the Mass Effect 3 endings up, but he did. And that alone tells us something. The endings are going to be addressed in Mass Effect 5 in some way, probably to provide closure for future games to come. I'll actually be putting my best theory on how the endings will matter to Mass Effect 5 over on Patreon, so keep an eye out for that one. For now, though, Gamble's second to last question is one of the subtler teases he's given us. What the heck is going on with our Asari scientist turned Shadow Broker? Gamble didn't just reference Liara's powerful Shadow Broker role here, but also her role as a scientist, which more specifically was tied to archaeology on the Protheans. Whatever Mass Effect 5 holds, Liara's background in archaeology might actually matter way more than we expect. But as always, Gamble saved the best mystery for last. What about S? And we all know what that S stands for. It's not really a question of whether Shepard is coming back at this point. It's a question of when, and what that return is going to mean for the entire future of this franchise. Watch this video next to see how the pattern of the Mass Effect 5 teases show how Shepard's new role will shape the future of Mass Effect. I spent 660 days analyzing every tease for the next Mass Effect, and came up with one theory that answers every question on this list. This one theory answers where the next game will take place, how our game-breaking choices in Mass Effect 3 can be solved, whether this N7 insignia means Shepard is coming back, and even who the likely villain and protagonist in the next game will be. All my answers are evidence-based guesses, but just a quick disclaimer that this theory should not be taken as expectations for the next game. It's currently just a theory. Before we dive into my setting and timeline guesses, let's first set the scene for everything I'm about to discuss. The main teases we're about to dive into include N7 Day illustrations, trailers, pieces of concept art, things from the Mass Effect comics and books, N7 Day blog posts, and of course, tweets by franchise director Mike Gamble. Every part of this theory is based on a tease from these lists, but the heart of the theory's main points are tied to either N7 Day hints or Gamble tweets. And that's because franchise director Gamble confirmed multiple times that every tease so far is intentional. Like this tweet from last year, where he confirmed the team spent days crafting the secrets hidden in the Game Awards trailer that features Liara. So just keep in mind that everything we've been teased with so far is most likely extremely intentional and relevant to how the next Mass Effect is going to look. Alright, let's dive straight into it with the first setting hint that dropped on N7 Day 2022. This illustration of what's likely Ilium's skyline. In Mass Effect 2, the rectangular pink lighting style and general shape of buildings from Ilium matches this art the best. And of course, Ilium is in the Milky Way, so that's one confirmed location in that galaxy. But even though this is from a Milky Way planet, the Mass Effect team carefully hid symbols within this piece to send us a message. There are 4 symbols sprinkled throughout the piece, equally divided with 2 from the trilogy and 2 from Andromeda. These 2 are from Kadara Port in Andromeda, and these are Omega and Cerberus symbols, which were specific to the trilogy. I believe this was an intentional choice to show that both the trilogy and Andromeda will play an equal part in the next Mass Effect, which does confuse the timeline of the next game, but more on that in a bit. To hammer home both galaxies being important for the next game, the team hid the codename SFX-5 on a nearby building. Given the original project codename for Mass Effect was SFX, this is likely a message to us fans that the game, at least for now, is internally being called Mass Effect 5. And of course, we can't forget Gamble confirming that showing both galaxies in the 2020 trailer was intentional. So if Andromeda will be included in the next Mass Effect story, does that cement the date of the next game being set in the 2800s, thus dooming multiple trilogy favorites to be dead and gone? I'm not so sure, particularly because of a couple teaser appearances by a calibration-loving Turian. At the end of the 2020 trailer, we see a few characters in the background. I honestly didn't want to believe it, probably because I couldn't bring myself to hope, but I finally decided that the character carefully placed here is Garrus. When I compared his profile in Mass Effect 3 to this character's, it matches up a little too well. Coupled with this character in the 2023 art also resembling Garrus, there's enough to convince me that the Mass Effect team hasn't decided to go for a large time jump, because a Turian's maximum lifespan is approximately 120 to 150 years old. Since Andromeda takes place 600 plus years after Mass Effect 3, Garrus should have been long dead, and yet we see him being teased. A few theories out there suggest that Garrus could be back but has hopped to Andromeda using cryosleep, thus making the date likely in the 2800s, but there's a huge reason as to why that's unlikely. All the planetside art in the teases is from the Milky Way, like this one that features a Solar Electronics storefront. Solar Electronics is an established Milky Way corporation, and these elegantly shaped buildings feature the pink lighting scheme of many Asari planets. When I hopped into photo mode and visited the Asari's home planet of Thessia, it matched up pretty well, minus the smoke and angry reapers. As a side note, if this is Thessia, then it's most likely now facing some type of air pollution, since these characters are wearing masks of some kind, which would make the likely timeline for the next Mass Effect after the Reaper War, since we didn't need to wear masks on Thessia during the war. This increases the chances that what we've seen from Garrus is in the Milky Way, but we'll get to which planet he's visiting later on. Something fascinating about this illustration is what looks like teleportation beams coming out of the buildings, which we've seen before when Shepard beamed up from Earth to the Citadel. It likely wasn't active on Thessia in Mass Effect 3 because of the Reaper's assault, but just keep in mind for now that instantaneous teleportation is canon, which will be very relevant later. For now, let's move on to another hint about the date for the next game that's hidden in the 2022 relay tease. In the bottom corner of the relay footage, a string of text includes a date that is cunningly November 7th, something 90. The Mass Effect team hilariously left out the crucial first two digits, but at least we got something. Even though we haven't got a ton of information to work with, let's see if we can finalize a setting and date. The setting at this point seems to be heavily Milky Way focused, so I'm going to guess for now that the Milky Way will be the setting. And based on that, since Garrus has been shown a couple times now, I'd say the date would have to be 2190, since he most likely hasn't jumped to Andromeda based on the art we've seen, and he wouldn't survive to 2290 and beyond due to his limited Turian lifespan. A few more teases that back up the date being 2190 are a few glimpses of Liara. In the 2020 trailer, we glimpse Liara's face, which some have pointed out might be wrinklier than usual, indicating a large time jump. However, when comparing this to Liara smiling in the Citadel DLC, we can see the same smile wrinkles. And again, with Garrus being in the background who can't live beyond 150, I doubt this is Liara 600 plus years older. Another confirmation of the date being 2190 is Liara's new outfit, which the CG artist Blake Sullivan shared on ArtStation. The coloring mainly matches Liara's Mass Effect 3 outfit, except for the additions of black, which are reminiscent of her mother, Matriarch Benezia. To me, this means that Liara's character arc is going to mirror her mother's darker tendencies, which we had already seen the start of in Mass Effect 2.
Have you faced an Asari commando unit before? Few humans have.
Have you faced an Asari commando unit before? Few humans have.
However, her newly teased outfit isn't fully black like Benezia's, which I think implies she hasn't hit the Matriarch stage yet. This most likely means that Liara's only in her second Asari life stage of Matron, which as a side note, could be the final role that Gamble teased for her in this tweet. Liara Tassoni, Doctor, Shadow Broker, and the redacted role of Matron. Her being a matron would also mesh with the date being 2190, since it'd only be 4 years after the Reaper War. The last Liara hint that helps us determine the setting is her remarks about the new relay.
The Council will be furious. Although they should know by now, no one else may affect the human differently. That's what it.
When she says, the Council will be furious, it indicates the relay is being built in the Milky Way, where the Citadel Council resides. I also think this relay is being built by the Systems Alliance using Cerberus technology, which I won't go into detail here, but I'll link the relay breakdown I made a few months ago in the description. So all the teases we've gone over so far, to me, show the Milky Way as the setting, at least to start, and the date of the next game being 2190. I know that with the mayhem caused by the vastly differing Mass Effect 3 endings, that this seems like an impossibility, but it's actually much more plausible than you think, which we'll get to later. Now, the most confusing question after establishing this setting and time period is why bother showing the Andromeda Galaxy at all, if the most relevant plot threads there happened after a 600-plus year time jump? Surprisingly, the answer to this is most likely hidden in the Geth teases from 2020 and 2021. In the 2020 trailer, we come across an Alderson disk, which is an artificial megastructure used to capture the energy of a star in order to fulfill large energy-heavy functions. In Mass Effect 2, Legion specifically mentions that the Geth were building this in order for all Geth to share memories, which would ultimately lead to them achieving consciousness.
We told you the Geth are building our future.
But you didn't say what it is.
A megastructure. The closest analog you have is a Dyson sphere. When completed, we will all upload to it.
What good will that do?
All memories will be shared. All perspectives will be unified. We gain intelligence by sharing thoughts, but we do not have adequate hardware for all of us to share at once. No Geth will be alone when it is done.
The Mass Effect team, including this disc, tells me that the Geth's evolution will be a huge part of the next Mass Effect. As a quick aside, while showing this disc, we also mysteriously heard the line, Arcturus Station, unknown vessel approaching, we need first contact protocols. We'll get to the significance of this line later on when discussing the villains for the next game. For now, let's focus on the Geth's role, because they're the ones that'll likely connect both galaxies' plot threads in the next game. And to see how, we have to examine the Geth crater released on N7 Day 2021. The crater itself is a perfect match to a comic panel from Mass Effect Discovery, prompting us to look at what the Geth were up to in that specific comic. Interestingly, the major discovery in this comic was that the Geth crafted a faster-than-light telescope made from 3 mass relays using strange technology that allowed them to find planets well beyond where anyone else was looking. This telescope was called the Colas Array, and it's very important to note that it was pointing directly at the Andromeda Galaxy. However, the Quarian that discovered the array emphasized that the Geth were not interested in the planets within that galaxy. This begs the questions: where were the Geth really looking, and what did they find? To answer these elusive questions, and to discover how the Milky Way and Andromeda will connect, we have to examine some concept art for the next game that likely tells us what these Geth found. When the 2022 relay first dropped, fans dove deep into the file's metadata and discovered that the project name of the next Mass Effect was Bowie, which might not seem like a big deal, except when you couple this realization with a few concept art pieces that we technically weren't supposed to know about. Marco Iazzi tagged multiple concept art illustrations with the codename Bowie, showing that it was drawn for the next Mass Effect. And there's 2 pieces in particular that are very eye-opening for how the Milky Way and Andromeda will connect. The first shows a glowing star explosion with stars inside of it, and the second shows a starship moving towards a star explosion with the title Diving In. To explain why a starship would enter an exploding star, we have to understand what happens after a star blows up. Once certain stars reach their version of old age, they explode in what's called a supernova, and a percentage of those exploded stars form black holes. In today's realm of physics, these black holes can theoretically be crossed, and again, very theoretically, be used to reach other galaxies in what's known as wormholes or Einstein-Rosen bridges. This would explain why the Mass Effect team wanted specific concept art of a starship diving into a glowing star about to explode. Relating this back to the Kolis Array Geth, I think that they found a wormhole using their FTL telescope, similar to Interstellar, where NASA found viable worlds through their nearby wormhole. Here's the absolute kicker though, that solidifies wormholes in the realm of Mass Effect specifically. In modern day physics, there's two major problems with wormhole travel via two connecting black holes. The first is that after crossing a black hole's event horizon, you have to avoid its crushing gravitational pull by traveling faster than the speed of light. And the second is that in order for the wormhole to be stable, there needs to be some source of negative energy. In the Mass Effect universe, though, EZO allows for faster than light travel. And as for the negative energy requirement, the Scourge from Mass Effect Andromeda has basically been described as a charged absence, i.e., negative energy. So basically, in order for the Milky Way and Andromeda galaxies to connect, you need a black hole, EZO to travel fast, and some of the Scourge. And conveniently, the Mass Effect team stuck a black hole in the middle of the Helios cluster that has EZO and the Scourge required for stable wormhole travel. They literally set up wormhole travel back to the Milky Way galaxy while developing Mass Effect Andromeda. But that's not even the craziest part. The craziest part is that the Mass Effect team also chose to make this black hole a Kerr black hole, which HowStuffWorks.com explains basically allows for time travel to either the past or the future. Remember how the date for the next game is probably 2190? Well, if the next game is going to do what I think they will, the Andromeda crew is going to use this black hole as a wormhole to reach the Milky Way and be blasted back in time to the date 2190. And the best part is, that's not even an unhinged take, because I'm fairly certain that Ryder has already been teased in the Milky Way, standing right next to good old Garrus. When the Game Awards trailer first dropped, Gamble tweeted at his fellow BioWare coworker that the three companions in the background were guessable by fans. This is hopefully Garrus, and if the backwards time travel theory is possible, then I think that it's likely that this is Callow, who piloted the Tempest, and the person in the middle is Ryder. When examining the Solarian's armor, it has a reddish hue, similar to Callow's outfit, and the reflective helmet, overall posture, and height of the middle figure fits Ryder really well. If these two Tempest members are standing next to Garrus on a Milky Way planet, that'd confirm that backwards time travel is possible in the Mass Effect universe. So maybe the Andromeda crew does get back to the Milky Way using a time travel wormhole, but with the setting likely being the Milky Way, will wormholes be a thing there too? There's actually a few major teases that indicate it will, which were carefully hidden in the 2020 trailer. During this section of the trailer, there are multiple voices overlaid in quick succession, while showing the local cluster, which is the home cluster of Earth. Whatever these voices are discussing most likely affects the Milky Way specifically, because they showed the local cluster. Each layered voice can be broken up into 5 distinct phrases, which I'll play one by one. I believe the first voice says, "Emitted probe in A." And voice 2 says, "Anomaly readings all across space."
Anomaly readings all across space. Anomaly readings all across space.
Voice 3 is the hardest to interpret, so my interpretation will most likely change. But for now, I hear, "It beats the heart." Voice 4 sounds like, "They do match." Voice 5 probably says, "Upon an unknown horizon." I think voices 3 and 4 connect to Shepard's return, so I'll tackle that later. For now, let's dive into how what we heard most likely indicates wormholes are present in the Milky Way. Voice 2 mentions anomalies across space, which could refer to the rapid formation of black holes across the Milky Way. As to why I believe that, I'll let Tali explain.
Any idea what's destabilizing the sun?
If I had to guess, I'd say that it was dark energy affecting the interior of the star.
The effect is similar to when stars blow off mass to enter a red giant phase, but haste from sun is far too young for this to be natural.
Dark energy speeds up the aging of stars, which makes it faster for them to reach the supernova and black hole stages. And in Mass Effect 3, the Crucible most likely released a wave of dark energy across the entire Milky Way, which must have increased the growth of certain stars viable to turn into black holes. This would then explain Voice 1, as these black holes turned wormholes would then have probes emitted into them to determine where they lead. Again, similar to what happened in Interstellar. I think Voice 5 confirms this, because they mention an unknown horizon, which could refer to the event horizon of a black hole leading to parts unknown until it's been crossed. Like I mentioned earlier, instantaneous travel from one place to another is already canon for short distances, but maybe in the next Mass Effect, they're going to take this teleportation-style travel to the next level. If we connect all these teases back to the Geth crater that led us to the Geth's FTL telescope, I believe that the Kolis Array Geth were most likely the first Milky Way race to discover a wormhole that led to other planets in a different galaxy. This will help explain why there's an Angara in the Milky Way pointing angrily at the mysterious Geth wearing clothes. But we'll get to that when we tackle the likely villains in the next game. For now, I feel confident in predicting that these Geth most likely found, went through, and returned from a wormhole. One of Gamble's more cryptic tweets imply that we'd be shocked about where we'd be traveling in the next game. So if the next game does feature travel to multiple galaxies via wormholes, I'd say that it'd warrant plenty of shock. Now, most of the teases we've gone over so far link the Milky Way and Andromeda both being relevant in the next Mass Effect. But there's one major problem with that, especially if the next game takes place in the Milky Way, only 4 years after the events of Mass Effect 3. And that is, how in the world will any of the major choices we made in Mass Effect 3 be resolved? For that answer, we have to look at a specific page in a book about BioWare's secrets. In the BioWare book on stories and secrets from 25 years of game development, it included a page near the end about the next Mass Effect. And in one of the paragraphs, it mentions that the next game will get back to its franchise signature of choices and consequences. Now, with everything we've seen thus far, I assume that this has to include consequences for the choices we've already made in the trilogy and Andromeda. And to back that assumption up, here's 4 tweets by the franchise director of the next Mass Effect, Mike Gamble. When asked if Liara is happy following the events of Mass Effect 3, Gamble replied, "Happy? I mean, depends." And he also altered a graphic on returning characters to only Conrad Werner, cryptically implying that Conrad is both most likely and least likely to return in the next game. These 2 tweets to me imply that Liara's happiness and whether Conrad will make an appearance in the next game depends on what choices each player individually made in past games. Liara's happiness would be vastly different if she lost Shepard as a friend versus as a lover, which is up to each player's romance decision. And Conrad might not even be alive beyond the events of Mass Effect 3, depending on your interactions with him throughout the trilogy. Add those tweets to the 2 Gamble tweets from October this year, we can see a definite pattern. Gamble tweeted about the BioWare team liking multiple endings, and replied that if those endings are happy depends on, what I believe, is our individual choices. With these tweets, coupled with the promise in the BioWare 25 book, there's enough evidence for me to believe that the franchise's signature choice and consequence will indeed return in the next Mass Effect. As to where we see this in the teases for the next game, look no further than the conversation Liara has with a Geth about the new relay. If there's going to be consequences in the next game for our Mass Effect 3 choices, then it's important to examine how Liara could be heard speaking to a Geth in the relay tease. That's because, specifically for players that chose the Destroy ending, or who chose to destroy the Geth on Rannoch, this conversation should be an impossibility. However, if my previous theory about the Kolis Array Geth is correct, then it would allow the Mass Effect team to circumvent those specific choices. Let's look at the Geth crater once again to find out how. Over here is a group of 4 characters moving towards the crater, who, based on the coloring of each character, I believe is Garrus, Ryder, who I'm hoping is Rex, and who I'm confident is Liara. Since she's walking towards a gigantic Geth-shaped crater, and is then heard in the subsequent tease speaking with a Geth, I assume that she's most likely speaking with the Geth we've already associated with the crater. Basically, Liara's probably speaking with one of the Kolis Array Geth that knew about a wormhole leading to parts unknown. This is likely because the Kolis Array was built before the events of Mass Effect 3, so the Geth that used the telescope could have easily gone through a wormhole they found, thus avoiding the Geth-destroying choices during the Reaper War. And if this Geth did escape, then it would make sense why we hear their voice as synthetic noises instead of understandable speech in the relay tease. In the games, Legion was the only Geth platform we could understand because he was 11 times more intelligent than the average Geth, allowing him to speak. But if we make certain choices on Rannoch, Legion sacrifices himself to upload Reaper code to the Geth Collective, which increases the intelligence of all Geth, thus allowing them all to speak with us. So if Liara can understand the unknown Geth, but we can't, I'm going to theorize that this individual Geth hasn't received Legion's Reaper code, indicating that they weren't around during the events of Mass Effect 3, making their escape through a wormhole more likely. In this way, the garbled synthetic noises of the mysterious Geth is likely a representation of our choices mattering in the next game, since the Mass Effect team specifically teased a Geth that avoided the Geth-destroying choices we could have made. But of course, the Kolis Array Geth avoiding our Geth-specific choices is one thing. But what about the other major choices we made in Mass Effect 3? Like the choices that could have led to the Quarians' destruction on Rannoch, or the Krogans' eventual destruction by sabotaging the genophage cure on Tuchanka? Well, I have a wild theory that those choices will be solved by one of the more subtle teases we heard in the 2020 trailer. During the Game Awards trailer, there's a moment where the camera pans away and we hear the words, "ARC-6 is away, Godspeed." Gamble confirmed that this was an intentional choice that mirrored the Godspeed phrase when the first arcs of the Andromeda Initiative launched. When I first heard this, I didn't think much beyond ARC-6 potentially referring to the Keyless Sia or an unknown 6th arc from the Initiative. Now though, I think the crucial part about this line is that it precedes the next section of the trailer, which has audio from the Reaper War. Basically, I think that this line about ARC-6 was a specific choice by the Mass Effect team to highlight that the ARCs were sent before the Reaper War began, which got me thinking about how the ARCs could actually be a way to circumvent the race-destroying choices we made during the Reaper War, like the potential destruction of the Quarians and the Krogan. Since the Initiative launched before the Reaper War, a portion of Quarians and Krogan that went with them avoided our potentially fatal choices on Rannoch and Tuchanka. And if backwards time travel from Andromeda to the Milky Way is possible, then the Quarian arc, if they ever make it to the Helios cluster, could replace the Quarians potentially lost on Rannoch. Conveniently, the Krogans that joined the Initiative had the highest resistance to the genophage out of all the Krogan clans, which allows them to reproduce at a rate 4,000% higher than an average Milky Way Krogan, according to Nakmor-Kesh. So these highly reproductive Krogan could replace the infertile Krogan in the Milky Way if they They took the Andromeda wormhole too. In these ways, the Quarians and Krogan from the Initiative could replace the Quarians and Krogan potentially lost due to player choice in Mass Effect 3. This would provide massive consequences for race-destroying choices, because an interaction with a Krogan who received the genophage cure versus an Initiative Krogan who only had an increased fertility rate because they left the Milky Way would be extremely different. Now obviously, this solution hasn't actually been teased in the next game. It's simply a solution I'm guessing could happen if player choice is honored in a return to the Milky Way. That being said, I think the ARCs were actually a genius plan to solve our contradicting choices, because of the insane plan the Mass Effect team has teased to bring Shepard back for one more story. Out of all the contradicting choices we could have made in Mass Effect 3, by far, the biggest one is whether Shepard is alive or not before the credits roll. And what's absolutely absurd is that we've been teased with Shepard's return in the next Mass Effect. But there's no way that this contradiction can be solved. Or is there? All the teases about Shepard's return are in the 2020 trailer, with the first being a confirmation of Liara and crew visiting Alkera. It's confirmed to be Alkera because of the icy atmosphere, 3 moons, and because the local cluster is visible in the sky above Alkera in both the trailer and when we visit there in Mass Effect 2. Also, Liara can breathe on Alkera despite its methane atmosphere, most likely because Asari can breathe methane, confirmed in an obscure planet description from Mass Effect 3. In the trailer, after Liara lands on Alkera, she removes an N7 insignia from a helmet and brushes snow off it with the familiarity of knowing who it belongs to. And the only N7 that would warrant this familiar thumb brush would be Shepard. But now we have to ask ourselves, why is Liara on Alkera in the first place? Alkera's only significance to Shepard is when they originally died there at the start of Mass Effect 2. So by showing us Alkera now, I firmly believe that the message is that Shepard is once again going to defy death and return in the next game. However, this section of the trailer is likely not showing us the recovery of our Shepard, because Shepard's second death was nearby Earth. It's probably showing us the recovery of a Shepard in a parallel universe who still hasn't been recovered from Alkera, because the Alkera in the trailer definitely isn't the one from our universe. And I think this unbelievable theory is proven by the N7 helmet piece from the trailer existing in the first place. Within our universe, there's only 2 things this trailer could be showing, since the helmet could only be on Alkera after Shepard fell to its surface. It's either showing us time travel to the past or the original recovery of Shepard. But here's the fun part. Gamble denied this showing a recreation of Shepard's recovery at the beginning of Mass Effect 2, and the Dead Reapers on Alkera rule out time travel to the past, since there were none there back when Shepard first died. So to me, this leaves only one option. This isn't an Alkera we know. To explain this, I'll use the popular physics theory called the many worlds interpretation, which actually connects to the wormhole theory from earlier. The many worlds interpretation assumes that there are universes that exist in the same space and time as our own, but in parallel. And the craziest part is that modern-day physicists believe that these parallel universes can be visited by jumping into wormholes formed by black holes. So what I think we're seeing in the trailer is a parallel universe which Liara hops to using a wormhole, and she's in the process of recovering the Shepard that died there in order to return to our universe and bring that new Shepard back to life, probably using the Lazarus Project. The returning part is most likely shown at the end of the trailer, where a distorted version of the local cluster is shown, probably representing our known universe that is plagued by anomalies. So when the trailer clued us in to anomalies across space and unknown horizons, I believe it meant to get us thinking about potential wormholes, but not just the ones that lead to different galaxies, but also the type that lead to parallel universes. I personally think that when Voice 4 says they do match, that it's a clue to indicate that a parallel universe had an event match of Shepard's death on Alkera. I know this sounds crazy, but I go over this way more in depth in my full trailer breakdown, including how the tease of Feynman plays a factor into this explanation. So check that out if you need more evidence to believe this part of the theory. Now, when I first thought up this fantastically unbelievable theory, I immediately came up with two major questions. First, if wormholes are a thing, how will we traverse them in the next game? And second, why bother recovering Shepard in such a convoluted way when they could just canonize Perfect Destroy where Shepard's already alive? I think everything we've discussed so far provides the answers to both those questions. First, how can these wormholes be traversed? I think the new human-made relay provides the answer. Gamble directed our attention to where specifically the new relay led, because as one fan pointed out, all the relays from the Reaper War were repaired. So why build a new relay in the first place? I think the answer to where it leads lies in the audio before Liara's conversation was deciphered. Here, listen to the droning audio on the original relay file. I think this is meant to imitate the sounds of a black hole, which sounds like this. And as mentioned earlier, black holes that form Einstein-Rosen bridges can lead to parallel universes and to other parts of our known universe, depending on which type of wormhole you go through. This relay might also be referred to as a dock, because the ships that go through these wormholes would need a place to return to and detox, so to speak, before heading off to familiar Milky Way territory. I think that the Mudskipper we've been shown is one of these detoxable vehicles that might have been specifically made to visit parts unknown. If this is true, my current guess for the Mudskipper's name is Multi-Dimensional Skipper, i.e. a ship used to traverse different dimensions, but that's purely a wild guess for now. Anyway, on to the one question I couldn't wrap my head around for the longest time. Why bother recovering a Shepard from a parallel universe when other, simpler options are available? The answer is probably pretty simple. From all the teases, art, and tweets I've seen so far, the one resounding message the Mass Effect team is trying to send us is that our choices are going to matter. And the biggest choice we made to date is which ending we chose. And of course, linked to that choice, whether our Shepard lived or died. So I think, based on the recovery of a parallel universe Shepard, they're attempting to mirror the Shepard that some of us might have lost, similar to the mirrored Quarians and Krogan from earlier. And because they're going to such lengths to recover one character, I believe that Shepard is going to be the protagonist of the next Mass Effect. Let's break down how Shepard's return could look, depending on which ending you chose in Mass Effect 3. In Perfect Destroy, Shepard lives, but in every other ending, including just normal Destroy, Shepard dies. I think that what we see in the trailer applies to all these endings, where the next game will feature a parallel version of Shepard that isn't our original from the trilogy. Theoretically, those who chose Control, Synthesis, or Normal Destroy would play as an alternate Shepard, while those who chose Perfect Destroy would play as their original Shepard after some type of recovery period. In this way, the Mass Effect team can honor that ultimate choice we all made in Mass Effect 3, while still allowing us to play as Shepard in the new game. The one problem, though, I have with my own solution is that I personally wouldn't want to play as a random alternate Shepard. I would much rather play as my Shepard from the trilogy. But does that mean I'd be forced to choose Perfect Destroy? Again, I don't have the answer to this based on the teases we've gotten so far, but if I had to guess, I'd wager that a mission from Mass Effect Andromeda holds the key as to how our Shepard could return without recovering their original body. In a mission on Havarl, an Angaran held an artifact from their previous life and remembered that past life's memories. And we already know that souls are a major concept discussed multiple times throughout all the games, with Legion asking if he has a soul being the most iconic moment on that subject. With this in mind, maybe every Shepard other than the one from Perfect Destroy will undergo reincarnation after holding a previous heirloom, thus retaining the memories our original Shepard made. In this way, when new fans to the franchise play the next game, they could start fresh with the parallel universe Shepard with no reincarnation attached, but the trilogy players could have their original Shepard back in some capacity. Now, with all this theorizing in mind, I've penciled in Shepard as the protagonist in the next game. But the protagonist conversation is actually more complicated than you might think, so I'll tackle that last. For now, it's finally time to tackle all the teases from last year's N7 Day, which holds quite a few hints about the next game's plot, including the potential villains. Before we get to the recent teases though, don't forget to subscribe to catch my upcoming N7 Day stream, which will definitely have this unhinged level of theorizing for whatever tease comes our way next. Hope to see you there. As to the unhinged theorizing taking place here, just a heads up that all my guesses on the 2023 teases are most likely going to change after this upcoming N7 Day, because each N7 Day hint thus far has helped explain the previous one. That being said, I'll still use mainly evidence-based guesses that connect to what I've explained so far to explain the N7 Day 2023 shenanigans. First up is the banner found on the 2023 blog post. This supposedly looks like it has nothing, but there is a shadow of what looks like a ship at the bottom edge, as well as what could be the shadow of a mass relay on the side. I've ruled out the bottom shadow being the Tempest at the very least, but it could be the Normandy SR-1 or SR-2. Most likely though, it's the shadow of our new ship, which Gamble hinted was his favorite ship to date. This shadow definitely doesn't fit the SFX ship seen beneath the Geth crater, but as a random aside, I think that this ship is an N7 exclusive ship because of its coloring. Who knows, maybe this SFX ship is for the use of Shepard. The one character I definitely don't think it's for though is the new N7, because I'm fairly certain they're a bad guy in the next game. Here's why. Once the final intercepted packet was received by fans last year, we finally got to see the identity of the new N7, except their head turn told us basically nothing. It was everything else that did. In the last packet, we saw words like warning and breach alongside Contact Systems Alliance, and these negative words were coupled with showing us the N7. I take this to mean that the N7 we're seeing is not allied with the Systems Alliance, but rather betraying them. Two other signs that I believe show this N7 out to be evil are their ridiculously high collar and the choice of music when we finally see who they are. Most high collars across popular media are used for villainous characters, hence why TVTropes.org labeled this trend the high collar of doom. As to the evil choice in music, listen to how it plays out when overlaid onto Shepard's first introduction. Combining the music while seeing a good guy like Shepard felt incredibly off, which gives me the impression that this is not supposed to represent the player, but rather a more villain-like figure. I personally don't think we can accurately determine who this N7 villain is until we get more teasers, but based on what Gamble tweeted about them, we could make a solid guess. On Twitter, a poster asked Gamble if the new N7 is a person or a robot/AI, and good old crafty Gamble replied with, "What's a person?" I think this tweet was meant to jog our memory about a similar line in the book Mass Effect Initiation. The line this resembles is after Sammy, an integratable AI, describes his purpose to the main character, Cora. He says, "Without organics, I would have no purpose. In order to be a person, I need people." Cora then goes on to ask herself if Sammy even qualified as a person. With this in mind, I think Gamble might be hinting that this N7 might be a fully functioning AI, and a rogue one to boot. I specifically think the N7 is rogue because of a sly hint in Initiation about who runs the Systems Alliance. Near the end of the book, the leader of the Andromeda Initiative, Gian Garson, speaks to Cora about the true purpose of the initiative, which is funded by a mysterious individual or group called the Benefactor. Garson reveals that the Andromeda Initiative's true purpose was to create a fully integratable AI, i.e. creating Sam, which is kind of hilarious considering the initials of the Andromeda Initiative is AI. Coincidence? I think not. Garson went on to explain that the entirety of the initiative is being led by an invisible conductor who is also pulling the strings of the Systems Alliance, and that their true purpose is to obtain Sam, who is a fully integratable AI. After reading all this, I can only conclude that the benefactor is the invisible conductor pulling the strings of both the initiative and the Systems Alliance, since they were the one who funded the initiative in the first place. Garson later died in the events of Andromeda, probably because she knew too much, and I believe it was the benefactor who ordered her to be killed. To me, this sets the benefactor up as one of the prime villains from Andromeda, whose identity was left on a cliffhanger. And after seeing this new N7, who could be a rogue AI, I think that at the very least, they have a connection to the benefactor, if not being the benefactor themselves. Obviously though, the benefactor being an AI and wanting to obtain a fully integratable AI is very shaky logic, so I'll table both the N7's identity and who the benefactor is for a future video. Regardless of whether or not the N7 is an AI though, last year's teaser still begs the question of why they breached the Alliance's security in the first place. The answer to that might be the mystifying phrase of Epsilon Oculon Nebula shown with the final intercepted packet. The only tweet we received from Gamble that could give us any hint as to what this phrase means was this one, where he said that the tease from last year and the relay tease might be connected. And the only thing that I could possibly think of that connects those two teasers is if the Epsilon Oculon Nebula phrase is actually a signal sequence in order to activate the newly made relay. Initiation includes a brief section on how Alec Ryder deciphered the signal sequence that activated the very first relay humanity discovered. So I believe that the N7 stripe in the bottom left corner of the relay tease, which is incredibly hard to see, is meant to show the N7 observing the relay, and in last year's tease, that same N7 most likely stole the signal sequence of Epsilon Oculon Nebula in order to activate it for their own nefarious purposes. Which, if the relay does what I think it does, would allow this rogue N7 to instantly teleport themselves to another part of our known universe, or maybe even to a different universe altogether. Even if this connection to the relay is completely disproven following this upcoming N7 day, I do think it's likely the new N7 is a newly built evil AI. And that's because if our choices from Mass Effect 3 are taken into account, then the synthesis ending would render most villains from the Milky Way useless. The synthesis ending caused organics and synthetics to, allegedly, fully understand one another, which limits who could be a villain if the next game does take place in the Milky Way. Except, that is, for newly built synthetics, like the new N7, who wouldn't have been blasted with the "we're all best buddies" DNA. As to who else I think are likely villains in the next game, let's examine the mystery table near the Geth and Clothes to find out. This code art probably has a lot of hidden details, but the most relevant hints to the villain discussion are the Geth, Asari, Angara, and mystery person near the back. I'm fairly certain that the Asari is Liara, and this Geth platform is probably one of the Geth who built the Colas Array telescope from earlier. As a quick refresher, Liara was most likely looking for the Geth who built the array, and then the next year she was heard speaking with what was most likely one of the Geth she found. So this Geth we see that's suddenly deciding to wear clothes is probably one of these newfangled platforms that's been through a wormhole to parts unknown. As to the Angaran, I had joked in a previous video that this could be Jaal, and I know other Angarans have worn this particular outfit in Andromeda, but I really do think this is Jaal now, and that's because of who I think this mystery person is. I'm fairly confident that the middle character from the 2020 trailer was Ryder, and once again, I think we're seeing Ryder here too. Comparing the mystery person to this Ryder picture, the helmet matches pretty well, but they are wearing an unfamiliar outfit in the new art tease. And as mentioned before, the Andromeda crew could have gone back in time to 2190 and landed in the Milky Way, making these two interacting with Liara possible. Regardless of these two being Ryder and Jaal though, the major point in this illustration that brings clarity on who the villains in the next Mass Effect could be is the Angara's angry posture towards the Geth. If this Angara is Jaal, we know one particular thing that angered him near the end of Mass Effect Andromeda, which was the revelation that the Angarans were manufactured for some unknown purpose by a mysterious race called the Jardan. The Jardan were the ones who created Remtech, a strange technology that only Ryder could interface with because of Sam. With this in mind, the connection between the angry Angaran and the Geth pictured here most likely relates to the strange technology the Geth used to form the FTL telescope. The Discovery comic that featured the telescope released the same year as Mass Effect Andromeda, so it's likely that the writers chose to add many Andromeda connections, which could make the use of Remtech in the Milky Way a real possibility. But there's actually a much stronger connection between the Milky Way and the Jardan than we think, and the secret to that connection is hidden in Jaal's smile. Jaal's teeth, as well as all Angarans, are fairly uneven, which is a strange design choice for the Mass Effect team to make, until we think about why their teeth would be like this. Since the Jardan created the Angara, they most likely made them in their own likeness. And when I went sleuthing for who the mysterious Jardan were, I stumbled across this ancient Angaran artifact, which has a head structure very much like a Prothean's. Taking this one step further, I analyzed Javik's teeth, and found that the front two teeth and canines mirror Jaal's really well too. And it wasn't just Angaran teeth, but the Ket, who were sister species to the Angara, also have similar looking teeth to Javik. The most logical explanation for this similarity to me is that the Angara, and thus the Ket, were most likely made by the Protheans, which would then make the Jardan Prothean, which is backed up by yet another Gamble tweet. Gamble added fuel to this theory by replying to a tweet that implied Remtech resembled Prothean tech with, or maybe it's, ... which I personally think can be completed with, or maybe it's both, which would imply that the technology we see here is both Prothean and Jardan, i.e., the Jardan are Prothean. Other Prothean similarities to Remtech include the Prothean archives on Mars and Javik's memory shard. However, because Director Addison remarked on the distinct differences between Prothean tech and Remtech, I think that the Jardan are Prothean, but with a twist. I think the Jardan are a group of Protheans that dabbled with either synthetic enhancements or artificial intelligence. The Remtech found all over the Helios cluster requires both an organic and synthetic aspect to operate, and since the Remtech was made by the Jardan, then this implies that the Jardan themselves are both organic and synthetic. This plot thread of blurring the line between organics and synthetics was not only addressed in the synthesis ending of Mass Effect 3, but also with Ryder's transformation near the end of Mass Effect Andromeda. Throughout the game, Ryder and Sam worked together to interface with Remtech vaults, but near the end of the game, Ryder interfaced with the Jardan technology alone, without the use of Sam. Based on Ryder's journey thus far, I think that the theme of organics becoming more like synthetics is far from over, and we'll probably see more of the same in the next Mass Effect. So because of this organic-synthetic plot thread most likely being integral to the next game's plot, my way too early prediction for who the villains are in the next game are the Jardan. With all of the equal Milky Way and Andromeda teases being shown to us, they'd be the perfect villains, since they have a connection to both galaxies, especially if they're Prothean. Based on the teases, the main reason I think the Jardan could be likely villains is because the Angara in this tease is angrily pointing at the Geth that Liara is with. If this Geth went through a wormhole that made contact with the Jardan in some way, then it'd make sense why the Angara doesn't like them. This might connect way back to the first Geth tease in the 2020 trailer of the Alderson disc, where we heard the line, "Unknown vessel is approaching, we need first contact protocols." Maybe this line held a convoluted meaning of the Geth making first contact with an unknown race in the next game, which based on how angry the Angara looks, could be the Jardan. So with all this theorizing, my villain prediction, which again is heavily subject to change, are newly built synthetics like the new N7, which might include the Benefactor, and the Jardan, who are potentially an organic synthetic version of Protheans. With newly built synthetics and the Jardan as the villains, there'd be a dual set of villains, similar to the dual villains of Cerberus and the Reapers in Mass Effect 3. Now I've covered every relevant tease for the next Mass Effect, except for one. The one Gamble tweet that keeps me awake at 3 a.m. just thinking about what it could mean. And this is that tweet. Referencing last year's N7-Day teases, Gamble tagged his fellow BioWare coworker and said, "They haven't found the other part, the one I was afraid of them finding. But with under 2 weeks to this upcoming N7-Day to go, I might have found the thing we missed. I don't know if it's accurate, but it is something." In the N7 Coats illustration, the elusive thing we missed might have to do with the reflections on the ground. Every reflection on this floor is fairly accurate. This person mid-walk, the Salarian and human, the Angara, and even the 2 drinks on the table. Most of them match really well, except the reflection of who I think is Ryder. And if we reference Gamble's tweet again, he said they haven't found the other part. I'm wondering if maybe this other reflection, which doesn't match Ryder's, is the part we've been missing. And if this is the case, I'm wondering if somehow this reflection is supposed to represent Shepard's. I know, a huge stretch, but we've come this far, so bear with me for a second. Every single tease I've covered thus far seems to indicate that closure for both the Milky Way and Andromeda plotlines are going to be a huge key to the next game. So if that's true, and if my dual villain guess is correct, then it would make sense to also have dual protagonists with both Ryder and Shepard. Andromeda already featured both Ryder twins as playable, at least for a brief time. And in the latest BioWare release, the Veilguard also features a dual character creator, although we don't yet know if we'll control both Rook and our former Inquisitor. Regardless, if this trend continues, then maybe we'll be seeing another dual character creator in the next Mass Effect, featuring a couple former protagonists that might finally be coming home. So with that, my final prediction for the protagonists of the next game is both Shepard and Ryder. With all the above predictions finalized before N7-Day 2024, my final theory can be summed up with one thought. I think that the next Mass Effect will return to its franchise signature of choice and consequence, provide closure for both Shepard and Ryder, and act as a launchpad for future sequels in other galaxies with the use of wormholes. I'll be referencing this specific theory, which I'm calling the continuation theory, during my N7-Day stream. But I do want to add a huge warning to this. I am definitely not expecting the next Mass Effect to just be a closure story. It'll probably also include a bunch of new characters and places we haven't seen yet. So just keep in mind that every guess here is based on 0.01% of what the Mass Effect team has shown us thus far. This should not be used as expectations for the next game. The one hint I wasn't able to figure out in time for this video was the significance of the relay in the 2020 trailer, so I'll leave that for a future video. Regardless of how accurate this theory is though, I hope at the very least we'll get closure on what happened with Shepard. I don't think Shepard should have died at the end. And with the potential tease of Shepard's return, I'm hoping that the Mass Effect team finally realized that Shepard's death defeated the entire point of the trilogy. To see why I think so, watch this video next on just that. See you there. So I have a theory that every Mass Effect 5 tease is actually connected to one secret timeline. And this timeline helps us piece together what each tease means, as well as predicts the next tease we'll see on N7-Day. Buckle up for one gigantic theory that helps us answer all these questions, along with the most important one, what Liara's secret plan is all about. Let's kick things off with 3 of the theory's assumptions. The first is that nothing will be canonized. The second is that most of the teases are literal as opposed to metaphorical. And the third is that the next Mass Effect has to sell a lot of copies, which means drawing on a lot of nostalgia from past player experiences. So with all these assumptions, my unhinged theory begins with the 2020 trailer, because it's in this trailer that Mass Effect 5's secret timeline is hidden. Every N7-Day since 2020 is connected to a specific tease here, so we'll go through the trailer first, then tackle the N7-Day teases. Alright, let's start from the top, and obviously, major Mass Effect trilogy and Andromeda spoilers will follow. The trailer starts with very faint sounds of Morse code, which sound like this. And the translation of this is, and 7. Now obviously later on in the trailer, there's a very specific nod to 1 and 7 in particular, but we'll get to that later. For now, there's actually another audio clue at the beginning we have to chat about, but can't actually hear because it's been removed from the current trailer. Because copyrighted audio was used in the original version, the Mass Effect team re-uploaded it, removing the original audio entirely. So now in the current trailer, we only hear sounds of a spaceship beginning its launch sequence. But in the original trailer, we heard this. We now know that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched. Now, in order to figure out how this relates to Mass Effect 5, we can't just take this audio clue at face value. We have to instead do what the franchise director of Mass Effect, Mike Gamble, told us to do. Right after the trailer first dropped, Gamble told fans that the trailer had a lot to unpack, and very crucially, to listen and look closely. He also added that he and his team spent days carefully crafting the secrets in the trailer, so each audio and visual tease here will tell us about what they're planning for the upcoming game. So to that end, we're going to interpret the trailer's audio clue first, then the visual clue, and then pair them together to figure out something about the next Mass Effect. And I think if we pair the audio here with the visual of the two galaxies, we actually get a clear hint about Mass Effect 5's villains. The galaxy in the foreground is the Milky Way, and Andromeda is in the background. And this audio clip is a line from the sci-fi novel The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, which features a conflict between Earth and an alien race from Mars. So this line directly relates to how alien Martians were watching humans on Earth. And in Mass Effect's lore, there was also a group of aliens who watched Earth from Mars, which were of course the Protheans. Javik confirms this to Shepard in Mass Effect 3.
Were you observing our ancestors?
Before the war, we cultivated species who showed potential. Eventually, you would have been offered a choice to join the Empire.
Now, in the novel The War of the Worlds, the Martians ended up attacking the Earth. So I think this is also hinting at the same thing. A Prothean war against the Earth is incoming. Now obviously, the Protheans were all wiped out 50,000 years ago in the Milky Way. However, it's very likely that a group of Protheans actually escaped to the Andromeda Galaxy, which is why this audio clue hinting at Martians was played while also showing Andromeda. And in Mass Effect Andromeda, we actually see hints of that Prothean escape. The Helios cluster was filled with a form of technology called remnant tech, or Remtech for short. And the way it looks is remarkably similar to Prothean tech from the Milky Way. In fact, when a fan mused on how this concept art piece from Mass Effect 5 looks more like Prothean tech than Remtech, Gamble replied with, or maybe it's ... which I think can be completed with, or maybe it's both. This would imply that the builders of Remtech in Andromeda were actually Prothean, and we know that the mysterious builders were called the Jardan, which I'm going to assume is connected to the Protheans. In a very obscure mission in Mass Effect Andromeda, we even saw hints of what resembled a Prothean in statue form, so there's plenty of hints that imply that the Jardan are Prothean in some way. I do think it's possible the Jardan are a different race entirely, which I covered in a recent video, but for simplicity's sake, I'll go with the Jardan being Prothean for this theory. So what this part of the trailer is implying to me is that a Prothean war in the form of the Jardan is incoming, and how the Jardan will travel to the Milky Way is likely answered in the next tease. This next phenomenon is likely a bipolar nebula, which forms when a dying star ejects gas symmetrically from its poles. And once again, the audio paired with this was copyright struck and removed from the current trailer. But after sleuthing online, I found the original audio, which was this. Roger copy, Eagle Houston, you are a go for landing, over. Houston here referred to NASA, and Eagle was the code name for the Apollo 11 spaceflight mission. So this audio clue is referencing when humanity first landed on the moon. Now how the first ever moon landing relates to this dying star nebula is actually connected to some concept art for Mass Effect 5. Kala Elizabeth covered on her channel how a lot of the Mass Effect 5 concept art featured dying and exploding stars, and Gamble had liked that video over on Twitter, so this focus on dying stars was clearly important, which immediately brings to mind a very specific mission from Mass Effect 2 that featured a dying star. During Tali's recruitment mission, she was investigating how the star Dolan was aging too quickly because of dark energy. And when a star ages too fast, it can quickly explode into a supernova and potentially form a black hole, or even a wormhole. The concept art for Mass Effect 5 implies wormholes will indeed be a thing by showing us exploding stars and what seems to be a spaceship moving towards it, which is exactly what I think this dying star represents, and will likely be the way the Jardan reach the Milky Way, especially because a ready-to-form wormhole already exists in the Helios cluster, which is this black hole here. In IRL physics, wormholes can supposedly connect black holes in space, allowing for travel between two large distances relatively quickly. However, there are two major problems with this form of travel. You have to first avoid the black hole's crushing gravitational pull, and you also need a form of negative energy to stabilize the wormhole's connection. And not so coincidentally, the Helios Cluster's black hole solves both these problems. The ESO falling into the black hole can reduce a starship's mass, solving the gravitational pull problem. And the Scourge, which is described as a charged absence, i.e. negative energy, would allow the wormhole to be stable. Which means that the Helios Cluster's black hole is the perfect way to form a wormhole and potentially travel anywhere else in the universe. Back to the trailer, the audio clue is of the first-time traversal of humanity to the moon. And I believe, coupled with this visual of a dying star, this tease implies that Mass Effect 5 will feature new traversals of space via phenomena like wormholes. In this way, both the Milky Way and Andromeda could be the setting, which we actually will see implied in more concept art later. Alright, so that's the first part of the trailer so far, the villains and setting. The rest of the trailer tackles the plot and timeline, the potential inciting incident, and of course, Liara's secret plan to deal with the incoming war. In the secret timeline, this next tease is connected to N7 Day 2021, which we'll cover in a bit. For now, let's hear the first audio clue tied to Mass Effect's lore. Since Arcturus Station was the primary headquarters of the system's alliance, this likely refers to when humanity first made contact with the Turians in 2157. And as this plays, we see a massive structure around a star that was explained by Legion in Mass Effect 2.
We told you together building our future.
But you didn't say what it is.
A megastructure. The closest analog you have is a Dyson sphere. When completed, we will all upload to it.
What good will that do?
All memories will be shared. All perspectives will be unified.
So basically, this megastructure that unifies the Geth will be important in Mass Effect 5. And if we tie this to the audio clue about First Contact, I think this means that these unified Geth will come into contact with an unknown race. Based on all the previous teases, this race will likely be the Jardan. In fact, the Jardan are probably why the Geth are now wearing clothes, but we'll get to that explanation in the secret timeline. For now, plot-wise, Mass Effect 5 will probably feature a first contact scenario between the Geth and the Jardan. And speaking of plot, the next tease we see is tied to what humanity is getting up to, which is linked to this audio clue. Humanity joining the galactic community is probably the point of this clip, which helps us figure out which blue planet this is, since only one of them was connected to humanity's galactic outreach. That planet being Feynman, which is the name of the award-winning physicist Richard Feynman. His work in the physics community heavily focused on quantum mechanics, which is funnily enough tied to the wormholes from earlier, because the black hole in the Helios cluster is likely evidence of a quantum wormhole, allowing time travel to take place. Since this black hole is a Kerr black hole, that means that its warped geometry allows for backwards time travel, as described by HowStuffWorks.com like this. If Kerr black holes exist, scientists speculate that we might pass through them and exit through a white hole. Instead of pulling everything into its gravitational force, the white hole would push everything out and away from it, perhaps into another time or even another universe. We'll come back to this part about other universes shortly. For now, it's very possible that if the Jardan used this quantum wormhole from the Helios cluster to reach the Milky Way, they'd probably arrive way earlier than the 2820s. And it's very possible that the same could be done in reverse if the wormhole was traversed from the Milky Way side. In this way, the timeline for Mass Effect 5 might be both the 2190s and the 2820s. The human-made relay from N7 Day 2022 might be for traversing these strange quantum wormholes, but we'll get there later. For now, let's move on to the final plot-related clue in the trailer, the audio connected to the Andromeda Initiative's ARCs.
ARC 6 is away. Godspeed.
Now, this is the only audio clip that doesn't have a definitive visual to go with it, so I'm going to take it at face value and assume this is referring to the 6th Initiative ARC that launched, which was the Quarian ARC. In the secret timeline, this tease is connected to N7 Day 2023 with the Andromeda distress signal. With all the connections to Andromeda so far, like the Jardan, this is going to be a pretty important part of what happens in Mass Effect 5, but we'll continue on for now, because this next section in the trailer is likely showing us the inciting incident of Earth being doomed in the next Mass Effect. The audio here has the lines, "Watch that squad fighter, they're going to take down the Dreadnought, engines are going critical, and abandon ship." This is then followed by a massive Reaper roar, clearly linking the audio to the Reaper War in Mass Effect 3. As to the visuals, it's likely also showing us a relay from the Reaper War, that's specifically the one nearby Earth. And that's because this audio clip is directly tied to events that took place on Earth.
Major! Kate! Damn it, they're in trouble!
The Virmire survivor spoke the exact same words as the ones in the trailer, and they said that for a dreadnought explosion in Earth's atmosphere. So this is why this relay is likely the one in Earth's